Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome to part 7 of What If I Was Reborn into the world of Avatar as the Prince Zuko and took over the world. Let the tale begin. Chapter 41, Shifting Balance. The cool morning air slithered through the stone walls and paper windows, weaving around the room like a silent breeze. Zuko stood in the center of his chamber, his bare chest rising and falling with calm, deliberate breaths. For the first time in days, his body was his own again. No bandages, no wrappings biting into bruises. Only faded yellow marks along his ribs and the faint memory of pain echoing in his joints. The worst of the wounds had passed. What remained was manageable. Endurable. He paced slowly, bare feet pressing against the stone floor. Each step was measured, testing the limits of his recovery. His left side still twinged, and his right shoulder was stiff from the impact of Bumi's earlier strike. But there was no hesitation in his movement now. No trembling knees. No ragged breathing. Zuko stopped in the middle of the room, dropped low, and extended both hands to the floor. 1, 2, 3. He pressed out push-up after push-up with deliberate form, lowering himself until his chest brushed the floor each time. The pressure tested his ribs, but they held. 30, 40, 50, he kept going. His muscles burned, but his breathing stayed even. The pain wasn't gone, but it wasn't stopping him either. He pushed back to his feet and moved again, this time with speed. A forward roll into a full somersault. He came up on one knee, shifted weight, and launched into a wide sweep of the room. A single fluid backflip off the wall's edge brought him back to standing, just beneath the wooden beam. The high leap jostled his healing ribs, but he clenched his jaw and ignored it. Again. This time, he sprinted forward. 3 steps, then up the wall. His right foot planted higher than the left, pushing him vertical before twisting off the stone. His body flipped cleanly, and he landed with feline grace, his back to the wall and knees bent low to absorb the impact. He grinned. Nearly there. Not quite 100%, but damn close. The herbs Iroh had given him after their first session yesterday still coursed warmly through his system. Bitter as they were, they worked like something divine. They dulled the sharpness of the injuries, yes, but more than that, they let him feel his ki more clearly. The pathways through his body felt less blocked, the movement more fluid. It was like oil had been poured into every joint of his spirit. He rolled his shoulders, then fell into a fighting stance. Fire wouldn't be needed now, just motion, fluidity. Repetition. He started with broad, sweeping arcs of the arms, stances from the classical schools of Fire Nation martial traditions, the kind taught to nobles. Then he broke form. Flowed into the low, fast maneuvers of the Dai Li style he'd observed during his previous visits to Earth Kingdom territory. Then again into the tighter spirals he developed for himself. It was his style now. Still incomplete, still evolving, but no longer borrowed. He took one last breath, let it out, and stood tall. The old pain didn't scream back. The bruises did not speak. He smiled again. Almost there. Then, knock knock. He paused, his shoulders rising instinctively. Come in, he said calmly, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. The wooden door creaked open. Ensign Lee stepped in first, crisp in uniform as always, his tone already formal. Beside him walked Hinaro, calm, collected. Her dark hair tied back tightly in warrior fashion, her gaze as sharp as ever. She bowed her head respectfully. Your Highness, they said in unison. Zuko blinked in surprise, not at Lee's formality, which was expected, but at Hinaro's unusually polite demeanor. No sarcasm. No scowl. Just a steady, even face. Didn't expect both of you, Zuko muttered, stepping slightly to the side and reaching for a towel to dry his neck. And you, he added, looking at Hinaro. You're unusually civil this morning. Only because I know you'll be limping by noon again if you keep showing off in here, she replied with the ghost of a smirk. Zuko smirked back. Wouldn't be the first time. Lee cleared his throat with precision. My prince, apologies for the early call, but the council is ready for your presence. There have been developments. Reports on General Fong's movements have arrived, along with updates regarding King Bumi and the Avatar. Zuko froze, not externally, but something in him halted at the mention of those last two words. He didn't show it for long. It's about time, he muttered. He turned away from them and reached for his formal robes. I'll be there shortly, he said. Wait outside. As you command, Li said with a bow, and Hinaro followed in kind. The door closed. Zuko looked at the folded garments in his hand. His breath steady, but his thoughts already turning sharp. General Fong. Bumi. The Avatar. The game was beginning again. And this time, he would be ready. He closed the door gently behind him, the echo soft yet final. The room quieted instantly, like it, too, was waiting on him. He took a breath, pacing slowly toward the window and staring out at the thinning mist that rolled over the cliffs beyond the base. A golden band of sun cut through the clouds, touching the camp roofs with light. A full day since he'd removed the bandages. But more importantly, time was slipping away. He clenched his jaw, eyes narrowing. The clock had been ticking from the moment he'd stepped foot in Nanhai, but now it was racing. He was already falling behind. That plan. The one seated weeks ago, the one only a few knew existed. A maneuver delicate in timing and execution, demanding he be at the right place, at the right moment. Any shift could break the rhythm he calculated. But depending on what the council reported today, news of General Fong, Bumi, and even the Avatar, it might need to move faster. Much faster. He couldn't afford delays. Not with the solstice nearing. He turned his head, gaze falling on the folded ceremonial robes laid across his bed. No. Not today. He turned on his heel and walked across the chamber, past his bed and toward the lacquered folding screen at the back of the room. Behind it stood a narrow wardrobe, untouched for weeks. It still bore the dust of disuse. He opened it slowly, the creak of its hinges echoing slightly in the quiet morning. There it was. His armor. His real armor. He had worn it during the first days of his journey, back when he was still pretending to be someone else, when he was exiled. Now, he was the crown prince again, but no longer the boy who had worn these plates before. Today, he was returning to that visage, not as a mask, but as a declaration. He took the gear piece by piece. The crimson tunic was thick but flexible, lined with darker maroon borders and stitched in patterns symbolizing flame and lineage. The deep red flowed like blood down the chest and arms. The shoulders were wide and angular, armored but not cumbersome, layered in overlapping pauldrons that gave him a broad, commanding silhouette. He tied the golden sash at his waist with quiet precision, the sharp, square buckle gleaming against the darker folds of the coat. Beneath the layered tunic, his inner robes were slate gray and sleeved to the wrist, fitted tightly at the forearms by bracers dyed in the red and gold Fire Nation hues, trimmed with V-shaped cuffs. His trousers were rugged and tucked cleanly into his calf-high boots, dark leather reinforced with thin steel at the soles and toes, built for war, not ceremony. At last, he pulled his topknot taut and fastened it with a firesteel pin. When he stood in front of the mirror, he didn't see a boy recovering from injury. He saw fire. Discipline. Legacy. He saw a prince prepared to wage war. Zuko stepped out of his chamber. Li and Hinaro straightened as he emerged, but neither spoke. Their eyes swept over him, recognizing the attire, the meaning. He looked like a warrior, not a royal. But it was the expression on Zuko's face that silenced them both. No smirk. No temper. No arrogance. Just the cold, focused glare of someone ready to act. Zuko met their eyes. Let's go. The walk through the fortress was short, but deliberate. The morning air cut cool against the warmth radiating from his armored body. Soldiers and aides bowed or saluted as they passed, some murmuring quietly among themselves at the sight of the crown prince in full field regalia again. The hallway narrowed, then broadened again near the courtyard steps. They descended together, Zuko in front, the others flanking behind like silent shadows. Outside, the wind tugged gently at the banners of the Fire Nation. The sun had risen fully now, its light painting the mountain ridges gold. The command tent stood at the end of the yard, reinforced with thick posts and shaded canvas, its perimeter guarded by royal soldiers. Two of them opened the flap wordlessly at Zuko's approach. Inside, the war council had already assembled. Admiral Tuvok stood at the far end near the strategy table, arms crossed, his armor polished to gleam. Donji, the aging lieutenant commander with streaks of gray in his topknot, nodded respectfully as Zuko entered. Sergeant Rin was already seated, his sharp eyes studying the table's spread of maps and documents. Azula stood with arms folded behind her back, dressed immaculately as always, but her golden eyes flicked briefly over Zuko's appearance and narrowed ever so slightly. Three other lesser-known captains stood to the sides, waiting. They all turned to face him. Zuko moved to the far end of the table, his boots pressing softly into the rug below. No one spoke until he was seated. Lee and Hinaro, knowing their place, bowed once more and stepped outside, the tent flaps falling shut behind them. Zuko placed both gloved hands on the table. "Let's begin," he said. His voice was calm. Dead calm. And the meeting commenced. Our latest reports place approximately 4,000 Earth Kingdom soldiers massed just past the northern ridge, stationed at the border between our side of Nanhai and theirs, Rin announced. Scouts believe they await reinforcements from King Bumi himself before initiating an all-out offensive aimed at this base and retaking the province. A low rumble of concern rolled through the tent. Zuko remained silent, eyes fixed forward, observing, listening. "There's more," Rin continued, casting a sidelong glance toward Zuko. "It is confirmed that King Bumi has returned to Omashu. And there are rumors that a delegation from the Northern Water Tribe has arrived to speak with him and the Avatar." A beat of stillness. "It's as we feared," Donji muttered darkly, his arms crossing as he leaned forward. "If the Northern Water Tribe is involved, then the unification of the Earth Kingdom and Water Tribes under the Avatar is not just a possibility, it's already in motion," Admiral Tuvok said gravely, his eyes narrowing. "This changes the nature of the war." A few of the captains and senior officers murmured agreement. One even spat, "They'll try to make the Avatar the rallying banner for every rebellion and resistance on the continent. If the boy earns the backing of Bumi and the Water Tribe, others will follow," Tuvok added. "It's only a matter of time before word reaches Ba Sing Se if it hasn't already." "Not Ba Sing Se," a gray-bearded captain muttered. "If that city stirs, the Fire Nation's grip on the continent will crumble." Tuvok nodded. "Ba Sing Se is a sleeping giant. It hasn't been directly involved in the war in almost a decade. And if it awakens, if the Earth King aligns himself with the Avatar and makes a move himself, then every ounce of momentum we've claimed in the last generation of war will vanish overnight." The air grew heavy with their collective realization. Azula leaned forward, her expression icy. "Nanhai is no longer just a border province. It's become a fulcrum. A lever to shift the war one way or the other. If we lose it, our grip on the Earth Kingdom loosens. If we win, we buy time. Time to crush this hope." More murmurs. "We all knew this would happen eventually," one of the lesser captains said. "But not this soon. This is too soon." Zuko had been still until now, gaze focused on the empty center of the war table. Then, a roar of flame erupted from his mouth, casting a sharp heat across the room, licking at the canvas ceiling but controlled, purposeful. Shocked silence. "That's enough," Zuko growled, the last embers crackling into nothing. His amber eyes burned with intensity. "Azula is half right. Nanhai has become more important than ever. But all of you, are missing the bigger picture." He stood slowly, favoring his side, but towering with authority. "Even if we win here, even if we crush General Fong and take every inch of this province, we only delay the inevitable." The council was silent, tense. As long as the Avatar is alive and free, the balance is already shifting. With the Water Tribe's help, he can start learning waterbending. With King Bumi involved, earthbending is inevitable. That leaves just one element between him and mastery. The Avatar represents hope, Zuko said. He's the symbol they've all been waiting for. The boy's very existence threatens everything we've built over 100 years. And the more time we waste, the more power he gains. Donji frowned. What do you mean, master all the elements? He's just a boy. The commander has a point, Rin added. He'll learn water and earth, maybe, but not fire. Never fire. A few other officers nodded in agreement. Zuko snapped. Are you all that naive? Do you really think we're the only ones who can teach firebending? Silence again. He leaned forward, eyes scanning every man at the table. Have you ever heard of the Sun Warriors? The ancient people who lived before the Fire Nation? The original firebenders? Donji narrowed his eyes. Those are myths. Extinct for centuries. Who told you that? Zuko challenged. How do you know? He didn't wait for a response. He couldn't give them the truth, not that he'd seen them in another life, another world. But he knew they still lived. He'd seen their hidden valley, their glowing paths, and the last 2 dragons of the world. Somewhere in this world, they were still out there. But that's beside the point, Zuko said, shaking the thoughts away. Over the decades, there have been deserters. Traitors. Firebenders who left our nation behind, hiding among the Earth Kingdom, the Water Tribes, wherever they could. Don't pretend it's impossible that someone, somewhere, will teach him firebending. A stillness fell again. None of you need reminding, Zuko continued, voice hardening, of Admiral Jianjiang. A chill passed through the tent. Arguably the strongest firebender outside the royal line, Zuko said, each word deliberate. He defected over a decade ago. And there have been others like him. The council members exchanged grim looks. That name alone was a wound that never fully healed. Finally, Admiral Kuvok cleared his throat. So, what do you propose, Your Highness? Zuko's reply was immediate. We strike. With everything we have. We cannot give them more time to build alliances. We must attack General Fong now, before Bumi's reinforcements arrive, before the Water Tribe establishes a foothold, and long before Ba Sing Se hears a whisper. He rose fully, standing tall, eyes locked on every man in that tent. If we do not crush them now, while we still hold the advantage, then the rest of this war will not be one we can win. We fight. We burn them from the land. We take Nanhai. And we do it now. Chapter 42, The Flames of Command. A tense silence lingered in the command tent after Zuko's declaration echoed against the thick canvas walls. The flickering lanterns overhead did little to warm the chill that swept through the room, born not of the cold morning air outside, but from the weight of what the prince had just committed them all to. Attack now? Admiral Kuvok asked, leaning forward. His dark eyes scanned the rest of the officers present. With all due respect, Your Highness, it's barely been 4 days since the last incursion. Our numbers may be there, but our readiness is not guaranteed. Zuko didn't sit. He stood tall, arms behind his back, the old Fire Nation uniform he now wore catching the glow of the lanterns with every shift of his posture. The men who are injured will remain here. The dead, we've already buried them. That leaves us with over 1,000 active troops from the original garrison, he began. Add to that the 5,000 Kuvok brought from the capital, we outnumber General Fong's current position by almost 2 to 1, even if King Bumi returns before we strike. Lieutenant Commander Donji ran a gloved hand across the tactical map spread across the table, fingers tracing the makeshift fire pits marked in red stones and enemy positions etched in charcoal lines. Our scouts reported at least 4,000 men under Fong massing across the river bend, just outside the cliffs to the northeast. Bumi's forces remain unconfirmed in number, but he's likely returned to Omashu. According to Sergeant Rin, Zuko said, turning to the older man standing near the entrance, those reinforcements from Bumi have not yet arrived. Rin nodded. We've seen no signs of new troop movement. Earth Kingdom banners are being raised, but their number hasn't changed. Our spies say King Bumi is still gathering allies and materials back home. There won't be a better opportunity, Zuko continued. Every day we delay is a day the Avatar and the northern tribes gain traction. Every hour is another soldier they can add to their ranks. If they take Nanhai, the entire southern line collapses. You speak of urgency, Tuvok said calmly, but urgency cannot outrun exhaustion. Your Highness, your men were crushed under Bumi's first attack. Many still recover. Entire divisions have been fractured. I lost 2 full platoons in the chaos and have been integrating replacements since then. You're demanding the same men who buried their brothers 3 days ago to march at dawn? Zuko turned toward Tuvok now, his amber eyes flaring with something deeper than irritation. It was conviction. Yes, he said. Because if we don't strike, they die anyway. If General Fong and the Avatar manage to take this province, their morale will skyrocket. The Earth Kingdom will smell blood. The Northern Tribe is already sending envoys, and we know what that means. If word reaches Ba Sing Se, and the Earth King decides to act, we won't be dealing with 4,000 men anymore, we'll be facing 40,000 in a month. There was a murmur among the officers. The mention of Ba Sing Se never failed to stir unease. Azula, seated a few chairs down from Zuko, tapped her fingers against the table. The Crown Prince is right, she said finally. We've underestimated the Avatar long enough. He's no longer just a spiritual figure, he's a rallying symbol. And symbols are dangerous. Assuming the Avatar is still in the province, Donji added. He is, Zuko said with certainty. Or he will return. Mark my words. The moment the Northern Water Tribe gets involved, the boy will come back. This means more to him than you understand. But the soldiers, another officer began. We'll be ready, Zuko cut in. We organize around the healthy, rotate the wounded into reserve camps, and structure our attack around the 5 primary divisions the Admiral brought with him. They're fresh. They're trained. And they weren't here when Bumi's madness scorched this land, they're not carrying the same trauma. Rin spoke now. I've already begun identifying officers from our local units that can lead effective detachments. My men are compiling readiness reports as we speak. The base is damaged but still functional. Supply lines remain intact thanks to the coastal landing from Admiral Tuvok's fleet. I've also ensured ammunition and rations were fully restocked, Tuvok confirmed. The fleet brought enough food and weaponry for a 2-week siege. But you want an open field assault, not a defense? Zuko nodded. If we let Fong choose the battlefield, we lose. He knows these hills better than we do. I want to take the fight to him, force him to commit early. We have the numbers, the mobility, and for now, the initiative. There was another pause, long, heavy. Lieutenant Commander Donji folded his arms. You'll need to inspire the troops. Most of them have never seen a prince on the front lines, let alone leading an assault. They will, Zuko said. Tomorrow, at dawn, I will lead the vanguard myself. This time no one spoke. Not even Azula, who glanced sideways at her brother with unreadable eyes. Tuvok slowly rose to his feet, saluted, and gave a single, sharp nod. Then I suggest we start organizing the battalions immediately. Zuko sat down at last, but his gaze never lost its edge. Let's begin. Zuko stepped out of the command tent, the lingering voices of the council muffled as the heavy flap fell shut behind him. The crisp air outside hit his face, the faint tang of salt from the distant coast mixing with the earthy scent of trampled grass and soldiers' campfires. His boots crunched against the gravel path as he started the slow walk back toward his quarters. 2 days. That was all the time he had to prepare his men before the march. Tomorrow morning, they'd move out, a column of steel and flame cutting through Nanhai's hills. A day later, they'd meet Fong on the battlefield. Zuko estimated the fight would last 2, maybe 3 days at most, less, if he could force the general's hand early. And if everything went according to plan, he would have just enough time. 2 days after victory to make it to Crescent Island for the winter solstice, to stand before Avatar Roku. He would make certain Aang was there too. There were questions that could no longer wait, about the Black Abyss, about the Airbender Yogan, about that cloaked figure whose presence still clung to his memory like a shadow that refused to fade. He turned a corner into the main building when a familiar voice called after him. "Zuko!" He stopped, his shoulders stiffening before he looked over. Azula stood a few paces away, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp as ever. "What do you want, Azula?" he asked, his tone clipped. "I only have time for a quick lunch before I meet again with Kavak and the captains." Azula, however, strolled toward him with deliberate leisure. "Then we'll have lunch together." It wasn't a suggestion. He exhaled through his nose but didn't argue, falling into step beside her as they entered the building. The clatter of distant mess tables echoed from below, but Azula's voice cut through it cleanly. "You're in quite the hurry all of a sudden," she said, her gaze flicking toward him as they walked. "Care to explain why?" "It's part of my plan to capture the Avatar," Zuko replied without hesitation, his words even. "I accelerated the timetable." "I thought you'd be pleased to hear that." Her lips curved, but not in a smile. "You expect me to believe you're suddenly rushing the assault just for that?" "That's the truth." "No," she said simply. "You're up to something else. Helping me get my status back, whatever arrangement we have." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "That's not your real goal." "You think I'm naive?" Zuko glanced sideways at her. "I never thought you were." They ascended the staircase, boots dull against the wooden steps, the tension between them thickening in the narrow hallway. When they reached his room, the door stood slightly ajar. Zuko pushed it open and paused. Inside, seated at the low table, was Iroh, steam curling up from a porcelain cup in his hands. The aroma of ginseng tea filled the air. "Ah, nephew," Iroh said warmly, his smile deepening the lines at his eyes. "And Azula. What a pleasant surprise." Zuko stepped inside, shutting the door behind them. "Uncle." Iroh gestured to the cushions set around the table, where a tray of food had already been laid out, grilled river fish, steamed vegetables, rice, and a pot of tea still steaming beside him. "Join me," Iroh offered. "It seems the perfect time for a shared meal before the storm comes." Azula's expression smoothed into polite composure, though her gaze lingered on Zuko as if she could read his mind through the steam rising between them. Zuko lowered himself onto the cushion opposite Iroh, his movements still carrying the stiffness of recent injury, though he masked it behind a calm face. Azula took the seat to his right, hands folded neatly in her lap before she reached for the teapot without asking, pouring herself a cup. The steam drifted lazily upward. Iroh poured for Zuko, then topped off his own. "Eat," the older man said, gesturing toward the spread. "Even the sharpest blade is useless if the warrior holding it is too weak to lift it." Zuko picked up his chopsticks and reached for the fish. "I'll be ready," he said. "You sound certain," Iroh observed, watching him carefully over the rim of his cup. "Certainty," Azula said smoothly, "is usually the sign that someone knows something the rest of us don't." She glanced at Zuko, her eyes narrowing just enough to be noticeable. "And my dear brother has been very certain about many things lately." Zuko kept his gaze on his food, taking a bite before answering. "I'm certain because hesitation loses wars." "Hesitation," Azula replied, tilting her head slightly, "or caution. There's a difference. One of them prevents mistakes. The other makes them." "Caution wastes time we don't have," Zuko said, his tone flat but deliberate. Iroh set his cup down. "Time for what, nephew?" Zuko didn't look up. "Time before the enemy gains momentum we can't stop. Fong is already consolidating his forces. If we wait, they'll have Bumi back on the field and possibly even more allies." "That's the official answer," Azula said, her voice light but edged. "But you don't take sudden risks without reason. And you've been accelerating your plans without consulting anyone, including me." Zuko's chopsticks paused briefly in midair before lowering to his plate. Plans change. The battlefield changes. You adapt. That, Azula said, is the sort of thing people say when they don't want to give the real answer. Iroh leaned forward slightly, studying his nephew. Azula's not entirely wrong. You've been different, Zuko. More focused, yes, but also more, how should I put it, guarded. As if you're keeping something close to your chest. Or hiding something, Azula added without missing a beat. I am hiding something, Zuko said, finally meeting her eyes. I am not denying that. I would be stupid to do that. Just as you are hiding things and Uncle has many things about his past that he wishes to keep hidden. What I'm doing for the Fire Nation. For all of us. That's a very noble sentiment, Azula said with a faint, knowing smile. But nobility doesn't suit you unless it's tied to ambition. You always want something, Zuko. So tell me, what is it this time? He took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth wash down his throat. Victory. The single word hung between them for a moment, heavier than it should have been. Victory at Nanhai? Iroh asked carefully. Yes, Zuko said. Everything else comes after. Azula's eyes lingered on him, searching for a crack in his composure. If she found one, she didn't show it. Instead, she shifted the conversation with calculated casualness. So, when the council marches tomorrow, you'll be leading from the front? Yes. That's dangerous, Iroh said, though there was no criticism in his tone, only concern. That's necessary, Zuko countered. The men fight harder when their commander bleeds with them. And if you bleed too much? Azula asked, her smile curling just slightly. Then Uncle will take command, Zuko said, looking to his uncle. And you'll do what you do best, turn the chaos into opportunity. Azula arched a brow. Flattery now? How unlike you. It's not flattery, Zuko replied. It's trust. Her expression shifted just enough for him to see the flicker of doubt behind her eyes, whether doubt in his sincerity or in her own interpretation, he couldn't tell. Iroh broke the moment with a genial tone. Well, I, for one, am glad we're sharing this meal. It's been too long since the three of us have eaten together without daggers, literal or metaphorical, on the table. I must however mention that I will not be joining you on your excursion with General Fong. I have a certain place I need to be within the next few days. Zuko looked at his uncle suspiciously. He guessed that his uncle would be meeting with his supposed contacts in the order. Give it time, Azula murmured, taking another sip of tea. Zuko didn't respond, instead refocusing on his plate. The meal continued, quieter now, each of them turning their thoughts inward even as they remained seated together. In that silence, the air between them was thick with unspoken calculations. Chapter 43, Battle for Nanhai. The sun was still low, its pale light spilling across the rolling plains outside Nanhai. Morning mist clung to the ground, curling around boots, hooves, and steel as two armies faced one another across a stretch of open field that would, by day's end, be caked in blood and ash. On the Earth Kingdom side, banners the color of deep jade rippled in the cold breeze, each marked with the bold square and circle insignia of the kingdom. At the forefront, General Fong sat astride his ostrich horse, its scaled legs clawing the dirt impatiently. His armor gleamed in the muted light, layered plates of lacquered green and bronze that covered him from throat to shin, the breastplate embossed with the same geometric emblem that adorned the banners. A segmented skirt of reinforced leather fell over the tops of his greaves, while the distinct rounded pauldrons of the Earth Kingdom curved upward to guard his shoulders. Beneath the armor, thick quilted padding softened the weight, though the uniform's stiff collar still pressed against his jaw. Behind him, 4,000 men stood in disciplined ranks. Earthbenders in full armor gripped their stone gauntlets and bracers, their stance wide and heels dug into the dirt, ready to draw power from the ground at a moment's notice. Infantry in lighter green and brown tunics carried long spears and heavy shields, their edges bound in bronze. Cavalry units sat tall on their ostrich horses, each mount fitted with green cloth barding and plate over the chest. Farther back, siege lines waited, rows of catapults carved from sturdy oak, reinforced with iron, their slings already loaded with boulders cut smooth for distance and accuracy. Even the non-benders among them moved with grim purpose, hauling ammunition, adjusting counterweights, checking straps and braces. The air on that side of the field was heavy with resolve, steady, immovable, the kind of confidence that came from defending one's own soil. Across the expanse, the Fire Nation stood in formation like a coiled serpent. Nearly 7,000 strong, their lines shimmered with the heat of barely restrained firebending. The first ranks were made up of armored infantry, men and women in red and black lamellar plates, the segmented armor overlapping for mobility. Behind them loomed the Fire Rhino cavalry, their beasts pawing the earth, armored from brow to flank, horns tipped with steel. Firebenders stood in disciplined lines, hands loose but ready, the faint shimmer of heat already radiating from their bodies. The siege lines were a stark contrast to their Earth Kingdom counterparts, heavy fireball catapults mounted on broad iron frames, each designed to launch spheres of oil-soaked stone that would ignite midair. At the very front of the Fire Nation center stood Crown Prince Zuko. His armor, polished to a muted shine, caught the early light in deep red tones. The layered plates across his chest and shoulders were heavier than standard issue, a clear symbol of rank, but fitted for movement. His helm, cradled under one arm, bore the stylized flame crest in blackened steel. To his right stood Sergeant Rin, his armor scuffed from past battles but his posture sharp, eyes scanning the horizon with a soldier's instinct. On Zuko's left, Lieutenant Commander Donji rested one hand on the pommel of his dhow, his other tucked behind his back in the stance of a man ready to give or receive orders. Behind them were several generals and captains, their faces a mixture of determination and anticipation, each waiting for the command to begin. No one spoke. The only sounds were the distant creak of siege weapon frames, the heavy breath of beasts, and the low hum of bending energy building in the cold air. Zuko's gaze swept the enemy lines. He found Fong almost immediately, tall, broad-shouldered, his ostrich horse restless beneath him. Their eyes didn't meet at this distance, but Zuko felt the weight of the man's presence. This was no border skirmish. No probing raid. This was the battle for Nanhai. And there would be no retreat. Rin stood beside him, arms folded under his breastplate, his eyes locked on the green Ambron Sea across the plain. Hard to believe, huh? By nightfall, this place either be ours, or a smoldering graveyard. Zuko smirked without turning his head. I'm not planning on the graveyard option. You always say that, Rin replied, glancing at him. But the last time we faced Fong, you were bleeding out, half-conscious. I remember, Zuko said quietly, his gaze steady on the enemy lines. That's why this time is different. Rin's lips twitched in something between amusement and disbelief. Different, huh? You going to tell me how? Or is it one of those mysterious prince things? Zuko didn't answer immediately, his eyes narrowing as if he could already see the moment of victory playing out. I don't need to tell you. You'll see it. Before Rin could reply, a deep voice rang out across the open field. Are we going to do this? Fong's voice boomed, or are you just going to continue staring at me like some lovesick noble? The Fire Nation lines shifted slightly, soldiers tightening their grips on weapons, murmurs passing down the ranks. Zuko took one slow step forward, his voice carrying across the field. I've waited long enough. His tone sharpened, each word deliberate. This day will be the day my legend rises on this world. He walked forward, one step, then another, closing the distance to a mere 10 feet ahead of his men. His hands extended outward, palms turned slightly upward, and began to move in wide arcs from side to side. The motion was slow, deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if he were drawing the air itself into his grasp. His shoulders rolled with each shift, his elbows bending as if shaping something unseen. Fong tilted his head, smirking. What is this? You dancing for me, boy? Zuko ignored him. His feet planted firmly into the dirt, knees bending just enough to root himself. The arcs of his arms became sharper, faster, his fingers curling as if hooking into something massive and invisible. The air around him shimmered faintly, heat distorting the cold morning haze. The prince's movements shifted again, hands rising above his shoulders now, pulling apart as though widening an enormous curtain. Then, abruptly, his arms thrust skyward, fingers spread wide, palms angled toward the heavens. For a moment, there was nothing. Then they saw it. Thin streaks of flame, hair-thin at first, snaked upward from the ground around him, drawn into an invisible vortex above his head. Dozens became hundreds, weaving together like strands of molten thread. The flames thickened, swirling in a slow, deliberate spiral, growing brighter, hotter. The cold morning air seemed to retreat, replaced by a dry, blistering heat that rolled in waves across the field. The threads fused into something far larger, the shape swelling until it hung over Zuko like a second sun, 10 meters across, a roiling sphere of fire so bright it hurt to look at. The shadows of men and siege weapons stretched long and sharp across the ground. Even from across the field, Fawn could feel the heat. His smirk faltered. "You still call this dancing?" Zuko's voice cut through the growing silence. The miniature sun blazed above him, the crown of a prince who intended to burn his name into history. Zuko didn't wait for the world to decide what to do next. He moved like a man who had spent too long sharpening an idea into a weapon and was finally ready to use it. His hands were still high when he let go. The sphere that had hung above him, that convective, living thing of light and heat, peeled away from the air as if it had been a molten moon cut free from its tether. It plummeted with an impossible weight, a comet of compressed flame that chewed the air to ash on its way down. Sound came with it, a low, keening roar that buried the creak of armor and the clatter of gearing siege engines. The ground itself seemed to recoil. On the plain the world changed. The cold morning that had bit the lungs now tasted of a sudden, sharp heat. Men squinted against it. Metal sung in its presence, helmets expanded, straps snapped with the first bite of thermal stress. A fine, dry wind raced ahead of the falling sun, carrying with it the scent of scorched grass and the sick-sweet tang of hot iron. Shadows vanished beneath the light, those that remained were sharp-edged and white-hot. Fawn's voice cut clean through the rising panic, not a shout of surprise but a command, honed from decades of cracking earth. He made no attempt to meet the sphere with some grand counter-gesture. Instead his body became the instrument of 1,000 hands. He stomped once, and twice, and the ground answered. A network of columns exploded up from the soil, not a single wall but a serried line of hammer-forged pillars and slabs that locked into each other like the ribs of some monstrous ship. Earthbenders dropped to their knees and shoved, palms grinding soil together, bending rock into compact, living armor. They moved like one organism, their faces were stone-set and wet with sweat as they drove the bulwark higher and higher. The wall that rose was magnificent in its own brutal way, layered till it was a moving cliff, lip to lip, the surface smoothed by practiced hands until it shone with the sheen of trodden basalt. Men behind it climbed, forming a human crown upon that earthen bulwark, shields braced. For a heartbeat the Earth Kingdom force looked as immovable as the mountains. Then the miniature sun hit. The contact was not a gentle implosion but an annihilating collision. The sphere hammered the wall with all the stored fury of a contained star, heat, light, and an explosion of kinetic pressure. Stone vaporized at the point of first contact, the front of the wall blistered, faces of boulders flaked away in molten curls. The impact uncoiled like a whip, the wall shuddered, then bulged outward in a violent, shattering bloom of rock. Chunks the size of houses tore loose and cartwheeled in slow, dreadful arcs. The shockwave boiled up through the field, flinging men off their feet. Siege beams cracked and splintered, catapult frames twisted like paper. Anywhere the light struck without earth between it and flesh, there were burns, clothing charred to lace, leather blackened and split, skin reddened and blistering. Men screamed, some in sudden, raw agony, others in the animal panic that comes when the world rearranges itself into an immediate threat. And yet, the wall had not failed entirely. Because Fawn's bulwark had been built from living earth, hammered and braided by practiced hands, it ate the brunt. Where the sun smashed through, its force was spent more in pulverizing basalt and kicking up a choking ocean of heat and smoke than in vaporizing living tissue. The energy that would have incinerated ranks of infantry was instead converted into shattered rock and a cascade of heavy, incandescent debris. The walls collapsed, became armor, slabs of stone, hurled like shields, smothered pockets of flame and snuffed some of the worst of the radiation. Where men would otherwise have been reduced to ash, they were instead crushed, broken, and burned grievously, horribly, but not entirely consumed. Rubble rained across both sides of the lines. Fire rhino saddles caught, hides smoked black and shied, bipedal warbirds, the ostrich-like mounts snarled in fear, hooves skidding as burning grit peppered their flanks. A couple of catapults nearest the impact exploded outward in a thunder of splintering wood, their payloads and frames turning into flying shrapnel. The ground around the impact became a cratered, steaming soup, where the blast had scorched the dew from the grass. It hissed and turned to vapor, casting a fog of steam that rolled like a ghost across the field. Up close, the carnage was immediate and blunt. Men stumbled, clambered up from the dirt with blood on their hands and faces streaked where heat had peeled off skin. Some clutched missing limbs, others lay like broken statues, faces turned away from the light. But there were far more survivors than there would have been if the sphere had met only flesh and cloth. The bulwark had been raw, brutal triage. It saved lives by turning final light into blunt, mortal force. Zuko felt the strike reverberate through him like a bell struck from within. The prince's chest heaved, breath coming in ragged pulls, the exertion of shaping and hurling that construct sapping more than he had expected. Heat licked at his shoulders and the hair along his arms stood on end, sweat ran into his eyes, stinging. For an impossible second he saw everything in hyperreal clarity, the way the air moved, the way men flinched, the way the ground smoked. Across the shattered trench Fawn kept his posture, face a mask of contempt and calculation. He had not expected his wall to stay whole, he had expected a storm. He had built a shield not to defy the sun but to blunt it, and it had done exactly that. His bared teeth showed in a skeletal smile. When men behind his wall screamed, he did not flinch. He barked orders instead, his voice snagging through the fog of steam, directing medics, pushing fresh earthbenders forward to brace the broken stones, sending riders to pull the most grievously wounded away. He had planned for this contingency, not for total survival, but for salvage, for delay. The battlefield, in his estimation, still belonged to the one who could keep fighting after the light diminished. Rin, standing on Zuko's flank, had his fingers pressed white into the haft of his sword. For a second he looked stunned, then furious. By the chefs, he swore, spitting into the dust. Donji's face was a mapping of white rage and worry. Men he'd fed, trained, laughed with now streamed blood across their cheeks. A silence fell across the field that had nothing to do with exhaustion. It was the stunned hush that follows an unthinkable demonstration. Both armies reassessed in that breath. Where had the edge been, and what price had been paid for it? The Empire had shown a new godlike weapon. The Earth Kingdom had shown the depth of its will to survive. The crater smoked and simmered. Men coughed and staggered up from behind fractured shields. Some began, almost immediately, to gather the wounded. Others, with the raw contempt of soldiers, checked weapons and counted losses. From either side, voices rose again, not the single sound of battle, but 100 small, human sounds, the keening of the injured, the clack of orders being given, the low, surging calls to let blow follow blow. Zuko's miniature sun still blazed, but no longer hung as a perfect orb. Fragments of earth spun through it, and the light wavered as if in pain. He could have burned it fuller, pressed until the entire front line turned to ash and the field became a cave of smoke. He felt the raw possibility in his limbs, the terrible ease with which he could press the advantage. He lowered his hands. That, too, was a choice, a lesson in control that tasted of both mercy and calculation. He had shown what he could do. He had paid a price, Fong had paid a price. The field lay redefined, scarred, smoking, and suddenly small enough to be measured by tactics rather than terror. Fong barked one final order at his men: hold them close, bandage the worst first, keep the formations tight, and the roar of the battle crept back in, slower, like a tide rebuilding itself after a great and violent gasp. The morning air was still thick with steam and scorched dust when the first sound tore through it, Fong's voice, raw and savage, carrying across the battlefield like a war drum. Enough standing. Advance. All of you, now. His fury was an open wound. The near destruction of his forward line, the burns licking across his men's armor, the shattered bulwark, none of it dulled his fire. If anything, it had stoked it into something primal. He stood tall on the broken remnants of the wall, his uniform, green lacquered chestplate and pauldron stamped with the Earth Kingdom sigil, dusted white with powdered stone. His voice ripped at the air, turning confusion into cohesion. Earthbenders slammed their palms into the ground in unison, a deep bass tum-tum-tum pulsing through the soil as they raised fresh cover and propelled themselves forward. Riders on their ostrich horses kicked hard, mouths screaming as they surged into a gallop. The clink of armor became a rolling roar, boots pounding in step with the beast's claws. From the rear lines came the long groan of straining timber, the catapults. Teams of benders and laborers heaved massive levers into place, their payloads loaded and bound with thick rope. With a synchronized snap, the first wave of siege stones hurtled skyward. The air filled with the sound of stone-splitting air, a bone-deep hiss, followed by the shadows of boulders blotting out the rising sun. From the Fire Nation's line, men tensed. The front ranks braced shields, cavalry pawed at the dirt, and the archers drew, eyes fixed on Zuko. The prince stood still in the center, flanked by Rin and Donji. His face was unreadable, his hair still damp from the morning's chill, the scent of scorched earth lingering on his robes. He didn't call for a counterstrike or shout for defenses to be raised. Instead, he simply lifted one hand, palm open toward the sky. The boulders arced closer, their stone skins glinting in the light. Zuko's gaze followed them, unblinking. And then, with the calm precision of a blade sliding into its sheath, he lowered his hand. That was the signal. The ground beneath the Fire Nation army seemed to pulse as firebenders across the line ignited their stances. Arrows tipped with flame screamed into the sky to meet the descending boulders, shattering some midair in bursts of molten shrapnel. The rest slammed into hastily raised walls of fire or were deflected by bending redirected air currents from the flanking ranks. The war horns of Nanhai roared. The lines began to move. The battle for Nanhai had begun. Chapter 44, Battle for Nanhai, 2. The world erupted in violence. The shriek of war horns drowned under the rolling thunder of boots, claws, and the guttural roars of soldiers. The frozen air of Nanhai shattered in a sudden wave of heat as Zuko broke into a sprint, fire trailing from his hands in rippling streams. Behind him surged the Fire Nation's vanguard firebenders and armored infantry, their steps in perfect unison, the ground beneath them scorched black. Ahead, General Fong's forces thundered forward. Earthbenders stomped in rhythm, the ground quaking beneath their coordinated strikes. Their ostrich horses screamed, tearing up the earth as riders leveled spears and stone-tipped javelins. The distance closed like the drawing of a bowstring, tight, inevitable, and about to snap. Zuko's boots pounded against the dirt, his breath controlled, eyes locked ahead on the green and gold figure of Fong at the head of his army. His opponent's expression was carved in stone, a man ready to grind his enemies into dust. The first wave of Earth Kingdom infantry met the Fire Nation front with a bone-shaking crash. The sound was not one note but 100, steel on steel, flame on rock, the wet crunch of bodies slamming together. Zuko's right arm swept in a tight arc, flame snapping outward like a whip. It tore into the chest of an earthbender trying to raise a wall, the man's armor blackening instantly before he collapsed to the ground screaming. A spear flashed toward Zuko's ribs, he twisted, his left hand snapping up, catching the shaft and ripping it free from its wielder before jamming the butt of it into the man's jaw with a satisfying crack. To his left, Sergeant Rin was a whirlwind of brutal precision, flames punching through shields, fists breaking stone constructs before they could form. Every strike was calculated, every movement economical. Donji, just behind, drove a squad of fire rhino riders forward, the beasts bellowing as they plowed through enemy ranks, horns and armored heads tossing men aside like ragdolls. But the Earth Kingdom line did not break. Their benders worked in pairs and trios, raising slabs of stone to deflect fire, then launching counterstrikes with deadly accuracy. One soldier sent a boulder the size of a cartwheel hurtling toward Zuko. He spun, lowering his stance, catching it on a swirl of flame that melted its edges before hurling it aside. Everywhere, The battlefield was chaos made flesh. Firebenders unleashed waves of orange and red, the heat warping the air. Earthbenders retaliated with spikes and slabs that exploded from the ground, sending men tumbling and snapping bones. Screams rose, some furious, others final. Zuko cut through 2 more soldiers, his mind sharpened to a single purpose: reach Fong. But every step forward was contested, every foot gained paid for in sweat and blood. An ostrich horse rider barreled toward him, spear leveled. Zuko dropped low, sliding under the beast's legs, palm touching the ground to leave a trail of fire that engulfed its hindquarters. The animal shrieked and reared, unseating its rider. Somewhere behind him, a catapult stone crashed into the Fire Nation's second line, sending bodies flying and tearing a gap in their formation. From the front, Fong's voice bellowed more orders, his men pressing in harder. And still, Zuko pressed forward, each strike and dodge bringing him closer to the man he swore would fall by his hand. The battle for Nanhai was no longer a clash of armies. It was a storm of blood, fire, and stone, and Zuko was its spear point. The din of battle was deafening, the air thick with smoke, the hiss of steam where fire met ice-cold stone, and the metallic tang of blood sharp enough to taste. Through the haze, Zuko's eyes locked on his quarry, General Fong. The man stood at the heart of the Earth Kingdom line, barking orders while his arms cut through the air in sharp, deliberate gestures, sending wave after wave of rock and stone tearing into Fire Nation ranks. His uniform, green lacquered armor trimmed in gold, its plates fitted perfectly to his broad frame, was splattered with mud, dust, and the red of his enemies. Even from here, Zuko could see the cold calculation in the man's face. "Fong!" Zuko's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. The general's head turned, eyes narrowing. He didn't answer, not with words. His left hand swept forward, and a trio of earthbenders stepped into position, their boots slamming into the ground in unison. Massive slabs of stone shot up in a line between them. Dozens of men stood between the two. Firebenders and earthbenders alike, locked in vicious combat, the line shifting and collapsing in bursts of death. Zuko didn't slow. His arms swept outward, a curtain of flame forcing back the nearest enemies as he surged forward. A spear jabbed for his throat, he dipped low, palm striking up under the weapon's haft, sending its wielder sprawling. His other hand lashed backward without even looking, releasing a jet of fire that caught an approaching earthbender full in the chest, hurling him back into 2 others. 2 men moved in from the flanks. Zuko pivoted on his heel, ducking under a stone spike that burst from the ground where he'd just been. His boot lashed out, breaking the knee of the closest attacker with a wet crack. He followed it up with a twisting leap, body coiling like a spring before releasing, the heel of his boot crashing down on another soldier's collarbone, driving him to the dirt. Another squad moved to block him, 6 men this time. The first swung a heavy hammer, the second raised a wall of earth waist-high, ready to trip him. Zuko vaulted over the wall, twisting in midair, his palms meeting as he launched a compressed sphere of blue fire into the hammer wielder's chest. The man went flying, armor melting against his skin as he screamed. He landed in a crouch and rolled forward, avoiding a blade that swung for his head. His momentum carried him into the soldier's legs, one arm wrapping around the back of the knee, the other striking upward with a burst of flame that cooked flesh under armor. The man collapsed, shrieking. Blood sprayed across Zuko's cheek as he elbowed another earthbender in the throat, crushing his windpipe. He didn't stop moving, couldn't. Every heartbeat brought more opponents, and every strike had to be fast, decisive, final. A flash of green to his right, an ostrich horse rider charging him, spear aimed to impale. Zuko sidestepped at the last second, planting his palm against the beast's flank and sending a concentrated blast of fire into it. The smell of scorched feathers filled the air as the animal screamed and threw its rider. Zuko didn't even watch him hit the ground. He was close now. The last line of defense between him and Fong tightened, elite earthbenders, their armor heavier, movements sharper. They attacked in unison, the ground erupting in jagged spikes that shot upward like the teeth of a giant beast. Zuko leapt from one to the next, his boots barely touching before springing again, his body twisting, hands throwing rapid bursts of flame to keep them from sealing off his path. One soldier caught his boot mid-leap. Zuko dropped low, spinning into a sweeping kick that knocked the man's legs out from under him. He snapped his wrist, a short burst of fire igniting the man's hair as he fell. Another tried to grab him from behind. Zuko bent forward, hooking the man's arm and hurling him over his shoulder into the path of a boulder meant for Zuko's spine. The impact crushed the man with a sickening crunch. He was breathing hard now, but his eyes never left Fong. Only three stood between them. The first came in swinging a stone axe. Zuko ducked low, sliding between the man's legs and firing a burst of flame straight up, the scream echoing behind him. The second lunged with twin daggers. Zuko caught both wrists, head-butting the man before twisting his arms until they snapped, one after the other. The last was a bender who dropped into a wide stance, hands slamming down. The ground split under Zuko's feet. He launched forward in a burst of fire from his boots, closing the gap before the man could react. His fist crashed into the soldier's jaw, sending teeth scattering into the mud. Zuko straightened, his breath misting in the cold air despite the heat radiating from his body. There was nothing now between him and Fong but 10 paces of blood-soaked earth. Fong smiled, slow, deliberate, without warmth, and raised his hands. Zuko's own hands ignited. The rest of the battlefield seemed to blur into noise and motion. Here, in this narrow corridor of death, there was only the prince and the general, and the war between them. The mud squelched beneath their boots as the space between them closed, not in a reckless charge, but in measured steps, both men knowing that the first true strike would set the tone for everything that followed. Fong moved first, his hands slicing downward in sharp, economical arcs. A column of stone erupted under Zuko's feet, but the prince was already moving, springing off the rising slab in a forward flip, the soles of his boots leaving a trail of flame that hissed against the rock. He landed low, one palm sweeping upward, sending a fan of fire toward the general. Fong's forearm caught it, the flames breaking harmlessly against a shield of compacted stone that flowed from the ground as easily as breath. "You've improved," Fong said, his tone almost conversational under the roar of battle. "Last time, you relied too much on brute force. Now, you move like a man who knows he can die." Zuko smirked faintly. "Last time, I wasn't ready." This time, he dropped into a low stance, one leg bent, the other extended behind. "This ends differently." They circled, boots grinding in the churned earth, eyes locked. Fong struck again, stamping his heel into the ground. A ripple of stone surged toward Zuko like a wave. Zuko ran toward it instead of away, planting a boot on the moving wall and using its momentum to vault high into the air. As he turned, his body corkscrewing, he sent a spiraling stream of blue fire down toward Fong. The general didn't flinch, his arm shot up, and a pillar of stone met the flames, the impact sending steam rolling between them. Zuko landed, his knees bending to absorb the shock. He pushed off instantly, darting to the side, forcing Fong to pivot. A feint of his left hand drew the general's guard up, and in that instant, Zuko's right foot whipped out in a high kick, a concentrated burst of fire leaping from his heel toward Fong's midsection. Stone plates snapped into place just in time, the flames searing across them. "Better," Fong admitted, shifting his stance. "But agility alone won't win you this fight." "Who said I'm relying on agility alone?" Zuko's voice was sharp, but his body moved sharper still. He closed the distance in a blur, one palm striking forward while his other arm came low, sweeping. The first was a distraction, the second igniting in a burst of flame that he pushed along the ground, a rolling arc of fire curling up at Fong's feet. The general jumped back, stomping down to smother it with a burst of stone, but that was all the space Zuko needed. He leapt, twisting in the air, his body arching over Fong as his palms spat twin jets of flame downward. The heat forced the general to roll aside, his uniform smoldering in places where the fire had kissed too close. They straightened almost in unison, Fong with his hands raised, Zuko with his stance low and ready. Neither was breathing hard yet. Neither was bleeding. This was still the testing, the measure of the other's resolve before the real killing began. But in Zuko's eyes, there was no doubt. This time, he was not the boy who had first faced Fong. This time, he would break him. Chapter 45, Battle for Nanhai, 3. The air was thick, not just with smoke and ash, but with the metallic tang of blood and the pounding weight of distant impacts. Every breath Ensign Lee took felt hot, dry, and dirty, the grit of pulverized stone scratching his throat. He moved low through the chaos, weaving between Fire Nation infantry clashing with the green and brown waves of Earth Kingdom soldiers. Catapult stones screamed overhead, shattering into jagged shrapnel that tore through men and armor alike. His uniform was scorched in several places, the crimson dyed darker with drying blood, some his, most not. His eyes scanned frantically through the haze of battle until they locked on a scene a dozen paces away. Sergeant Rin, helmet missing, hair plastered to his sweat-soaked forehead, armor battered and blackened, was locked in a vicious duel with an earthbender unlike most Lee had seen. The man was broad-shouldered, his torso bare except for strips of leather strapped across a chest streaked with dust and dried crimson. His lower half was clad in standard Earth Kingdom uniform trousers, but his feet were bare, each step digging into the soil with practiced control. Even from here, Lee could see his calloused soles grip the dirt like an extension of himself. Rin lunged forward, blade flashing in the sunlight that pierced the smoke, but the earthbender pivoted sharply, one hand slicing through the air. The ground between them buckled violently, a jagged spike of stone erupting upward. Rin twisted aside just in time, the rock grazing his armored shoulder and sending him stumbling. Lee began moving toward them, ducking under the swing of a Fire Nation halberd as one of their own fought past him. The earthbender pressed his advantage, stomping down hard, forcing the ground beneath Rin to ripple and crack like a living thing. Rin leapt onto one of the smaller rising plates, using it as a platform to launch himself forward, sword arcing for the man's neck. The earthbender's arm swept up, catching Rin's blade mid-strike with a sudden pillar of stone that shot from the ground. The impact rang out like a bell, sending vibrations up Rin's arms. "Come on," the earthbender roared over the din, "show me what you've got, fire rat." Rin bared his teeth and twisted his wrists, snapping the blade free from the stone with a metallic scrape. He spun low, his sword's edge igniting in a tight ribbon of flame as he slashed across the man's midsection. The leather straps burned instantly, the smell of singed hide and skin mixing into the choking air. But the earthbender didn't cry out, instead, he stomped hard and thrust both palms forward, a wall of stone exploding toward Rin like a battering ram. Rin managed to raise his sword horizontally, the fiery blade cutting into the stone, but the sheer force sent him skidding back, boots tearing trenches in the dirt. Lee reached them just as Rin steadied himself again. "Need a hand, Sergeant?" Lee called, voice hoarse from smoke. "Stay out of this, Ensign." Rin barked without looking back. "This one's mine." The earthbender smirked at that, his stance widening. He dragged one heel along the ground, pulling up a thick slab of earth that he spun like a shield before slamming it into the ground again. The resulting shockwave rippled outward, cracking the soil beneath Lee's feet and forcing him to plant his stance hard to stay upright. The man's skill was undeniable, he wasn't just throwing stone blindly. Every motion was controlled, deliberate, meant to force Rin into defensive movements. And Rin, for all his speed, was starting to tire under the relentless assault. Lee's hand tightened on his own blade. Watching from this close, he could see the rhythm. The earthbender's left hand always dipped a split second before he summoned stone spikes, his right heel grinding before a wall came up. If Rin didn't exploit those tells soon, Lee knew, this duel was going to end with a broken, lifeless body in Fire Nation armor. Lee stayed just outside the immediate circle of their fight, boots grinding into loose gravel and dirt as the battle roared around him. The clash between Rin and the earthbender had formed its own little arena amid the chaos, men on both sides unconsciously giving them space, as though sensing that this was no ordinary exchange. Rin was breathing harder now, his chest rising and falling beneath the blackened metal of his cuirass. Sweat ran down his temples, streaking clean lines through the grime coating his face. Every swing of his sword was fast, faster than most could track, but the earthbender's defenses were a fortress. The man's bare feet shifted constantly, each placement purposeful. Lee noticed how his toes curled into the dirt just before a counterattack, his whole body sinking low to draw strength from the ground. He moved like he and the earth were a single living being. Rin darted left, then cut back right, his blade igniting in a sharp arc that sliced toward the man's ribs. The earthbender dropped to one knee and swept his arm up, calling a jagged plate of stone that deflected the blow with a ringing clang. He didn't pause. With his free hand, he punched forward, sending a volley of fist-sized stones hurtling toward Rin. Rin twisted, flames bursting from his boots as he slid sideways, the stones smashing into the ground where he had stood a heartbeat ago. The impact sent shards flying, one of which clipped his cheek, leaving a thin crimson trail. The earthbender's lips curved into a faint, wolfish smile. "You're quicker than most." His voice was rough, almost approving. Then his tone hardened. "But not quick enough." He stomped once, the ground beneath Rin's feet cracking, then split violently upward in twin pillars aimed to crush him between them. Rin's instinct saved him. He kicked off one of the rising slabs, flipping backward in an acrobatic twist that landed him low and ready, sword angled forward in a defensive stance. Lee's grip on his own sword tightened. He could feel the tempo of the duel shifting. Rin's bursts of attack were becoming shorter, his dodges a little tighter, his recovery a hair slower. The earthbender stepped in, one hand raised. With a guttural shout, he slammed both fists down toward the ground. A shockwave rippled outward in a ring, knocking loose dirt and pebbles into the air. Rin staggered, one knee hitting the ground as the force rattled through his bones. Lee's pulse quickened. He knew that motion. It was the setup for a finishing blow. The earthbender was already shifting his stance, right foot sliding forward, his shadow falling over Rin. Rin spat blood, but instead of retreating, he leaned forward on one hand, blade drawn low and glowing with intense heat. His eyes locked on his opponent, and Lee could read the silent message there, "I'm not done yet." The earthbender surged forward, arm cocked to summon a crushing boulder strike. The ground trembled as the moment hung in the balance, the noise of the larger battle fading into a dull, distant roar around them. Lee remained still, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the razor-thin space between them. One mistake, just one, and Rin would be gone. The earthbender stepped in for the killing strike, his arm driving forward, earth buckling beneath his will, but Rin moved first. A sudden gout of fire erupted from his free hand, forcing the man to shield his face with a hastily raised stone wall. But the flames weren't meant to hit him, they were meant to mask Rin's advance. Rin darted through the smoke, sword low and wreathed in fire, the blade glowing like molten metal. He swung upward in a brutal arc, the impact shattering the corner of the wall and forcing the earthbender back 2 steps. The man's eyes widened, surprised at the sudden ferocity. He stomped, trying to raise another barrier, but Rin was already inside his guard. His sword whipped left, a streak of burning steel slicing across the man's armored forearm. The scent of scorched leather and singed flesh filled the air. With a grunt, the earthbender slammed his foot down again, forcing a jagged spike up between them, trying to create space. Rin answered with a tight spin, his boot trailing fire that melted the edge of the stone as he rolled clear. Lee could see it now, the rhythm had shifted. Rin's movements were sharper, more dangerous, his firebending no longer separate from his swordsmanship but woven seamlessly into it. Every slash came with a burst of flame, every step was propelled by jets of fire from his heels. The earthbender swung a stone hammer into being and lunged, roaring as he brought it down. Rin caught it on the flat of his blade, flames erupting along the steel in a violent flash. The heat was so intense that the hammer's edge cracked. Rin snarled, shoving the weapon aside and twisting his torso into a downward slash. Fire licked along the blade's edge as it cut deep into the man's side, the armor there splitting under the combined force of steel and flame. The earthbender staggered back, one hand going to the wound. His face was twisted in both pain and disbelief. He tried to summon another wall, but his foot barely grazed the dirt before Rin closed the distance again. This time Rin didn't give him a chance. He drove the tip of his flaming sword forward in a precise thrust that pierced through the chest plate just below the collarbone. A burst of fire channeled through the blade, erupting from the back in a searing explosion. The Earthbender gasped, a wet, choking sound, before collapsing forward, smoke rising from the hole in his armor. Rin pulled the sword free, flicking the blood and char from its edge before stepping back into the larger chaos of the battlefield. His chest was heaving, but his stance was still strong. Lee exhaled slowly, tension draining from his body. He stepped forward, clapping Rin on the shoulder. "Remind me never to doubt you again, Sergeant." Rin gave him a sidelong glance, wiping soot from his cheek. "Good. Saves me the trouble of proving you wrong next time." Somewhere deeper in the fray, the roar of bending and the screams of the dying called them back to reality. Neither man said another word as they turned toward the next fight. Chapter 46, Red Dragon of Destruction. Zuko's boots ground into the churned earth as he circled General Fong, the chaos of the battlefield a constant roar at the edge of his senses. All around them, fire clashed against stone, screams mingled with explosions, and the acrid tang of smoke stung the air. But here, between the two of them, there was a pocket of stillness. A space that existed for one purpose alone. The general's stance was wide and rooted, shoulders squared beneath the weight of green lacquered armor. The sun caught the bronze of his pauldrons, making them gleam like polished stone. His hands hovered low, fingers twitching, ready to seize the earth beneath his feet. Zuko shifted lightly on the balls of his feet, his stance more narrow, weight coiled in his legs like a spring. He moved like a predator measuring the distance before the pounce, his hands loose, one forward and one drawn back, ready to fire with speed and precision. They didn't charge at once. Instead, Fong sent the first test, a sharp stomp that tore a jagged line of rock up from the ground, racing toward Zuko like a spear point. Zuko pivoted on his heel, twisting his torso and sweeping one arm down. A crescent of blue flame hissed into being, slicing across the stone. The rock split in two with a sharp crack, each half skidding harmlessly past. Fong didn't pause. His left arm came up and the earth responded, rising in a knee-high wave meant to trip and slow. Zuko didn't leap it, he let the rising wave push him upward as he bent his knees and kicked off, a twin plume of fire bursting from his feet to launch him higher still. He landed light, already spinning into a whip-like strike that sent a ribbon of fire snapping toward Fong's flank. The general's arm swept wide, pulling a slab of earth into place. The fire struck it in a burst of sparks, leaving black scorch marks but not breaking through. Fong smirked behind his wall, then pushed forward. The slab became a battering ram, hurtling toward Zuko. Zuko dropped low, one hand touching the ground for balance, the other flaring fire beneath him. He slid aside in a burst of heat, feeling the rush of displaced air as the slab thundered past. His slide turned into a roll, and from that roll, he sprung forward, acrobatics flowing into aggression. He lashed out with a rapid series of kicks, each one trailing a short burst of blue fire. Fong blocked with arms like stone, literally, rock plating grew over his forearms to take the hits, sparks scattering off them in showers. Zuko didn't stop. His movements were quick, almost serpentine, twisting from one attack to the next, making it harder for the general to predict the angle. Fong shoved him back with a sudden palm strike to the ground, sending a shockwave through the dirt that buckled the ground under Zuko's feet. Zuko vaulted over the collapsing ground, twisting midair to hurl a concentrated fireball from both palms. The blast struck at Fong's feet, detonating in a sharp bloom of blue and orange. Dirt and smoke billowed upward. But even before it cleared, Zuko saw the shape moving, Fong, untouched, riding a pillar of earth that had lifted him above the blast at the last instant. From his elevated perch, the general brought both fists down. A cluster of boulders tore free from the ground, spinning before they fell like a rain of stone. Zuko darted in a zigzag sprint, fire jets kicking from his hands and feet to accelerate each sidestep. One boulder grazed his shoulder, the impact jarring but not enough to slow him. As the last rock crashed down, Zuko leapt into a spinning aerial kick, a tight spiral of fire exploding outward from his foot. The flames weren't just an attack, they cloaked his position, buying him a moment of concealment. Fong narrowed his eyes, stepping back into a defensive crouch. He knew Zuko was inside the cloud. But when the prince emerged, it was from low to the ground, sliding forward with his palm extended. A stream of fire shot out in a tight, compressed beam, white-hot at its center. The general reacted fast, stomping and pulling a thick wall up in front of him. The beam hit, molten cracks spider-webbing across the surface, but the wall held. Zuko didn't waste the moment, he was already circling, flames curling from his heels as he sprinted to find another opening. They met again in a violent clash, Fong swinging his arm like a club, a block of earth forming at the end, Zuko meeting it with both forearms shrouded in flame. The impact rattled his bones, but he twisted with it, turning the block's momentum into an opening for a point-blank kick to the general's ribs. Fire exploded from the strike, forcing Fong to stagger back. It was still only testing, still probing. Neither man had committed to their killing stroke yet. But both knew the next exchange could be the one where the fight truly began. And neither was planning to hold back. The momentary lull broke when Fong's right foot slammed into the earth, the sound a dull boom that rolled through the battlefield. Zuko's eyes flicked downward just in time to see the ground ripple toward him like a living thing. He sprang to the side, flames bursting from his boots to propel him, but Fong was already moving, no wasted motion, just brutal efficiency. The general's left hand clenched into a fist, pulling up a waist-high wall of rock that shot forward like a battering ram. Zuko twisted to avoid it, only for a second wall to rise in his new path, forcing him to leap upward. That was exactly what Fong wanted. From below, two thick stone columns erupted at an angle, slamming together like jaws. Zuko barely tucked his legs in time, the closing stones scraping across his boots and tearing a chunk from the sole. He landed in a roll, but his momentum carried him into Fong's range. The general surged forward, swinging a stone-covered arm like a hammer. Zuko ducked, the blow whistling over his head, but a follow-up backhand caught him in the ribs. Pain exploded through his side as the rock plating scraped skin and bit into muscle. He stumbled, the taste of copper blooming in his mouth. Fong didn't let up. His palm slammed down, the earth under Zuko's feet splitting open into a jagged pit. Zuko kicked off the edge, a spiral of blue flame erupting from his foot to clear the gap. But as he landed, a massive boulder, half his height, came hurtling toward him. He thrust both palms forward, unleashing a roaring gout of flame that cracked the surface of the rock, turning it red-hot before it exploded into shards. But even as the fragments rained down, Fong was there, bursting through the smoke, driving a knee of stone straight toward Zuko's chest. The prince crossed his forearms in a block, fire bursting to soften the blow, but the force still sent him skidding backward. His boots dug trenches in the dirt, the skin along his forearms raw from the heat and impact. Zuko tried to press back with speed, low dashes, bursts of flame, a spinning heel kick trailing fire, but Fong matched him step for step. The general's earthbending had shifted, it was faster now, sharper, as though he'd stopped testing and started hunting. A spear of stone jutted from the ground, forcing Zuko to vault over it. Midair, a hail of jagged rocks shot up toward him. One grazed his calf, tearing cloth and opening a shallow gash that immediately burned with pain. Another clipped his shoulder, spinning him in the air. He landed awkwardly, his palms slapping into the dirt to steady himself, just in time for Fong to send a shockwave through the ground that jarred his bones and rattled his teeth. The prince's footing faltered, and that was all the opening the general needed. Fong stomped once, hard. The ground beneath Zuko erupted in a jagged spike that caught him in the thigh. Not deep enough to impale, but enough to punch through muscle and send a blinding flash of pain through his body. Zuko hissed between clenched teeth, stumbling back as blood ran warm down his leg, soaking into his boot. Fong advanced with cold precision, his arms sweeping in brutal arcs. Massive slabs of earth ripped free from the ground, forcing Zuko to weave and duck. One caught him across the shoulder, spinning him half around, and before he could recover, a second slammed into his side, driving the air from his lungs. The prince staggered to one knee, his hand clutching the dirt. The battlefield smell of scorched stone and iron-heavy blood filled his nostrils. All around, soldiers screamed and died, but here, in this brutal duel, it was just him and the general and Fong's relentless, crushing advance. Zuko rose, flames flickering around his fists, but blood was already dripping from his side and his movements had slowed. Fang's expression didn't change as he stepped forward again, raising both hands. From the ground behind the prince, two massive boulders surged upward, each the size of a small hut, grinding and cracking as they hovered for a heartbeat, before hurtling forward to crush him. Zuko inhaled sharply, tasting blood, the heat of his own fire pooling in his lungs. He had seconds, maybe less, to decide whether to dodge, deflect, or try something far more dangerous. The twin boulders slammed together with a deafening crack. Dust and fragments of rock blasted outward, swallowing Zuko whole in a storm of stone. For a heartbeat, nothing could be seen through the haze but shadows twisting inside. When it cleared, the prince lay broken in the dirt. His uniform was shredded, his chest plate cracked, and blood painted his arms, his face, his ribs. One eye was half swollen shut. His breaths came ragged, every inhale stinging his lungs as if they were filled with glass. The world narrowed into flashes, faces of screaming soldiers around him, streaks of flame colliding with shards of stone, the battlefield a canvas of gore and steel. But for him, there was only the sound of his own shallow breath and the cold weight of the dirt beneath his cheek. His limbs trembled as he tried to rise, but they refused him. His body was numb with pain, yet each throb reminded him he was still alive. Damn it, what do I need to do to end this fool? He remembered their first clash upon arriving in Nanhai, the overwhelming force of Fang's earth, the humiliation of retreat. He had trained since then, sharpened his fire into swifter, deadlier shapes, honed his body into a weapon of acrobatics and speed. But now, bleeding and sprawled in the mud, he realized the truth: speed without weight, finesse without force, was just a spark against the avalanche that was General Fang. It was naive. Too soon. Yet something stirred inside him, deeper than pain, deeper than despair. His key. The reservoir within him that had always seemed broader, vaster than the Zuko of this world. And now, with the noon sun pouring down, every ray was fuel, every breath of warmth coursing through his veins like liquid fire. Even as blood leaked from a dozen wounds, he felt it, the endless, searing tide of ki waiting to be drawn out. Trying to stick to the bending style of this world had limited. Fortunately, he had knowledge beyond this world and he was going to use it. Fang had already begun advancing again, his boots cracking the earth beneath each step, his shadow growing long across the prince's prone body. The general's tone was half mocking, half admiring. "You should not even be standing," Fang growled. "Yet you do not yield. Truly, the resilience of the royal bloodline is something to behold." Zuko spat blood into the dirt, then forced his palm against the ground. His arm shook violently, but it held. Slowly, painfully, he rose. First to one knee. Then, with a grunt torn from his throat, to both. Blood dripped freely, streaking his chin, soaking into the scorched remains of his uniform. The general paused, eyes narrowing as if unable to believe the sight. Zuko lifted his head, his good eye burning with something beyond fury. His voice rasped at first, then swelled into a bellow that carried across the battlefield, silencing even the clash of soldiers nearby. "I, who am about to awaken, am the heavenly dragon who has stolen the principles of domination from God." The air thickened, trembling as heat began to ripple from his body. Fang's jaw clenched, but he did not move. "I laugh at the infinite, and I fret over the dream." The ground around Zuko cracked, lines of molten red glowing beneath the soil. His aura flared, not the calm orange of ordinary firebenders, nor even the cold blue he had toyed with in the past, but something raw, crimson, alive. "I shall become the red dragon of domination." The words vibrated through the air like the beat of a war drum. The soldiers, both Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom alike, turned their heads, caught in the gravity of the moment. "And I shall sink you to the depths of the Crimson Purgatory." Zuko roared, his voice splitting into rage and defiance. "Juggernaut drive!" The battlefield erupted. From the ground around him, a wall of red and orange fire surged upward, spiraling into a vortex that stretched toward the heavens. The vortex screamed as if it had a voice of its own, a living tempest of flame wrapping Zuko in its embrace. The heat blasted outward, making even Fire Nation soldiers shield their faces. The very air shimmered, bending and warping, as if reality itself recoiled from the force of it. There he stood within the inferno, bloodied and broken yet unyielding, like a demon reborn. The flames spun around him 3 stories high, a cyclone of incandescent wrath that painted the world in crimson light. The sun was no longer in the sky. It was here, summoned, alive in Zuko's hands. Chapter 47, Fire Dragon Attack. The vortex of fire twisted higher and higher, screaming with the sound of a hurricane until suddenly, it collapsed. The storm of flames snapped inward, imploding into Zuko's body in a rush of heat that seared the battlefield. The air stilled. Dust swirled low across the torn ground. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Fawn's chest heaved as he narrowed his eyes through the haze. His lips curved into a mocking smirk. All that noise for a speech, boy? Do you plan to kill me with words alone? Or did you simply want your soldiers to hear your last prayer? Zuko did not answer. His one good eye glared at the general with unflinching malice. His face, split and bloodied, his cheeks swollen, his skin smeared in streaks of red, twitched into a grotesque smile. His lips parted, and his voice rasped hoarse but unyielding. Fire Dragon. He arched his back, his chest swelling with air, the veins on his neck bulging as if he were swallowing the entire sky. Roar! The flames erupted from his mouth in a torrent so massive it seemed to split the battlefield in half. A spiral of fire surged forward, twisting in a tight helix as it expanded. Not a simple jet of flame, but a rotating, concussive storm of red and orange fire. It howled as it shot across the ground, tearing the soil to ash beneath it, melting stone into rivers of molten slag. Fawn's eyes widened. Too fast. Too wide. Too much. He slammed his palms into the earth, raising a thick wall of rock in desperation, but even as it rose he knew, it wouldn't hold. Instead, he slammed one heel down and thrust with his entire body, launching a pillar of stone beneath his feet. The ground buckled, and the general was hurled sideways like a boulder fired from a catapult. The roar of fire swept past, engulfing the place where he had stood. The world shook. The blast tore open the battlefield. Soldiers from both sides screamed as the shockwave ripped the air from their lungs. Dust and gravel rained down in choking waves. When the firestorm cleared, a crater the size of a city square yawned where the general had been standing. Its edges were jagged, glowing red-hot, the earth itself charred and blackened, radiating heat like the mouth of a furnace. Fire Nation soldiers stared in awe, some raising their fists with cries of triumph, others too stunned to breathe. Earth Kingdom soldiers faltered, their confidence shaken by the sheer devastation of one man's attack. Thong, crouched atop his pillar of stone 50 meters away, ground his teeth. His face was smeared with soot, and one arm was scraped raw where the fire's edge had licked him. So, the boy has grown teeth, he muttered. Then louder, but tricks will not win you this battle, boy prince. Zuko dropped to one knee, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth as the effort shook his body. But when he looked up, that grotesque smile remained. His voice cracked through the smoke like a blade. Then let me show you what a fire dragon truly is. He dug his heels into the ground, leapt forward, and twisted his body mid-air. Flames burst from his fist, spiraling into a condensed spear of fire that he hurled with a snap of his arm. Fire Dragon Brilliant Flame. The spear split into 3 mid-flight, streaks of burning red that curved like serpents. Fawn stomped his foot, summoning a forest of jagged stone spires that shot upward to intercept. The fire spears slammed into them, detonating one after another, blasting shards of molten rock across the field. Zuko was already moving, flipping over the falling debris, fire igniting around his heel. He twisted in the air, spinning down like a hawk. Fire Dragon Wing Attack. Twin blades of fire erupted from his arms, extending outward like burning wings. He swept them down with a scream, slashing through the stone spires and shattering them into chunks of molten gravel. Fawn thrust his palms outward, and the broken chunks froze mid-air before spinning into a whirlwind. He hurled them back at Zuko like a storm of knives. The prince dropped low, flames exploding from the soles of his boots. He rocketed forward, weaving through the storm with acrobatic rolls, his body a blur of black and crimson streaks. One stone grazed his arm, tearing flesh, another clipped his ribs, but he did not falter. With a guttural roar, he inhaled deeply once more. The heat gathered in his lungs until his chest burned like it might split open. Fire Dragon's iron fist. He slammed his flaming fist into the earth, and a pillar of fire erupted outward, splitting the ground in a line that shot straight for Fong. The general crossed his arms, and the earth surged upward into a dome. The fire smashed against it, splitting stone apart, the ground glowing with heat, but Fong stood within, teeth clenched, forcing the dome to hold. When it finally cracked and blew apart, he burst from the rubble with a roar of his own, launching twin slabs of stone the size of oxen directly at Zuko. The prince twisted into a roll, flames shooting from his hands to boost him sideways. The slabs missed by a breath, crashing behind him with an explosion of dirt. He landed hard, knees nearly buckling, but the fire around his body flared bright again. Fong sneered. "You've improved. But you burn too brightly, too fast." And when the fire runs out, he raised his arms high, earth rising with him into a massive hammer of stone suspended above his head. Only ashes remain. Zuko wiped the blood from his lips with the back of his hand. His smile never wavered. His voice was steady. "Then I'll burn until nothing's left of you first." He spread his arms wide, the flames around him thickening, circling. He inhaled, every nerve in his body screaming as Ki and Sunfire merged. Fire Dragon crushing Fong. He lunged forward, his hands closing like the jaws of a dragon, fire coiling between them into a spiraling maw of flame that snapped toward Fong's descending hammer. The battlefield shook once more, fire and stone colliding in a storm that lit the world red. Zuko wiped a smear of blood from his mouth with the back of his arm. His body screamed in protest, every muscle torn between exhaustion and fury, but his eyes, burning with that same molten fire as the sun itself, never left General Fong. "You think you've seen everything?" Zuko rasped, his voice hoarse but steady, teeth shining blood-red from the iron taste of his own cuts. His lips twisted into a grin, crooked and fierce. "You haven't seen anything yet." He slid his hands together, fingers curling, twisting into strange, deliberate shapes, motions utterly foreign to this world. Fong narrowed his eyes, confusion briefly flickering across his face before he braced for whatever madness the young prince had conjured. Zuko ended with his right hand pressing against his mouth, his left hand forming a brace beneath it. "Fire style, Phoenix Flower Jutsu." Zuko roared. From his lips, fire erupted, not in one stream, not in one burst, but in a flurry of flame projectiles, each spitting from his mouth like arrows dipped in the sun. The flames twisted into dozens of smaller spheres, glowing crimson and orange, scattering like a storm of burning petals. They hissed through the air, crackling and shrieking as they fell upon the earth like raining stars. Fong ducked the first, his body snapping to the side as a fireball burst where his head had been, turning dirt to molten glass. He spun and raised walls of stone to block the next, but two spheres curved around, exploding against the earth at his feet and showering him with molten sparks. His uniform smoldered. He cursed under his breath and dashed left, weaving between the falling arcs, while Zuko, standing upon a high, jagged pillar of earth torn up by Fong himself earlier, kept spitting fireballs relentlessly. The battlefield watched in awe. Fireballs rained like divine wrath, detonating with heavy booms across the ground, igniting corpses, burning shattered wood, consuming broken catapults. Even the sky above them shimmered with heat waves. Fong rolled behind another wall of stone, raising it with a stomp, but Zuko's voice thundered across the carnage. "Fire style, majestic destroyer flame." The world seemed to hold its breath. Then it came, a tidal wave of fire, massive, blinding, roaring from Zuko's mouth as though he himself was the furnace of a god. The sea of flame surged forward, orange and red and blistering white at its core. The earth hissed as the fire washed over it, rocks glowing red before collapsing into pools of bubbling black slag. Corpses were reduced to ash in moments, charred armor collapsing into hollow husks. The battlefield, already a hellscape, became an inferno. General Fong gritted his teeth and bellowed, slamming both fists into the ground. The earth shuddered. With sheer will, he pulled a massive wall of stone up from the ground, thick, jagged, a fortress unto itself. The tidal wave of flame struck it with a deafening roar, licking and devouring its surface. Fong strained, veins bulging in his arms, sweat sizzling on his skin as he held his defense. For a moment, it seemed as if the wall might hold. But Zuko was already moving. The prince used the raging sea of fire as cover, his body darting low, leaping from rock to rock, flames glinting across his bloodied skin. He closed the distance like a predator. His face was streaked with soot and blood, his eyes mad with determination. By the time Fong realized Zuko had disappeared from atop the pillar, it was too late. Zuko burst through the wall of fire, a streak of black and red, fists already ablaze. Fire Dragon's secret art, Crimson Lotus. Flames spiraled violently around his arms, wrapping them like molten gauntlets. He drove his right fist forward with a scream, the fire spinning, boring through the air like a flaming drill. It slammed into Fong's chest. The explosion cracked like thunder, hurling chunks of molten stone in every direction. Fong staggered back, coughing blood, but Zuko gave no pause. His left fist slammed forward, another spiral of fire blasting through the wall of dust and smoke. It tore into Fong's shoulder, flesh searing, uniform blackening and curling as the smell of burned meat filled the air. Fong roared and lashed out, sending jagged spears of rock shooting upward, but Zuko's acrobatics saved him. He twisted, flipped over the spikes, landed with a slide, and came up swinging again. His fists were a storm of drilling flame, each strike exploding upon impact, tearing through stone and flesh alike. Blood sprayed across the scorched ground as Fong's body took the punishment. His uniform hung in tatters, his skin blistering beneath the heat. He swung a boulder the size of a cart at Zuko, but the prince didn't dodge this time. He roared and slammed both fists forward, the spiraling flames of the Crimson Lotus boring through the stone, shattering it into fragments that sprayed harmlessly around them. Fong's eyes widened, fear at last. Zuko's face was savage, streaked with blood and ash, his teeth bared in a grin that was closer to a beast than a prince. His fists hammered again and again, fire bursting outward with every blow. The ground beneath them cracked and cratered under the force, the air shimmering with suffocating heat. At last, one strike landed clean across Fong's jaw. The flames exploded, ripping flesh from bone. His mouth burst with blood and broken teeth as his body spun and slammed into the ground with a wet, sickening crunch. Still, Zuko did not relent. He leapt upon him, fists blazing, raining down blow after blow. Fire and gore mixed as Fong's armor cracked, his body bloody beneath the relentless storm. The earth itself seemed to recoil, scorched black and trembling beneath the assault. By the time Zuko drew back, panting, his arms still smoking with flame, Fong lay half buried in shattered rock, blood spilling freely, his chest heaving in ragged gasps. The prince stood above him, swaying on his feet, blood dripping from his face onto the broken general. His voice was low, guttural, filled with fury and triumph. "I told you, this battle will end differently." Chapter 48, The Legend Begins. The ground beneath them trembled as General Fong stirred, bloodied and broken but not yet dead. His chest rose and fell with ragged gasps, each breath bubbling blood across his lips. His armor had been scorched black, chunks of it fused to charred skin, and his eyes burned with something primal, something that wasn't discipline or command anymore but pure, unhinged fury. With a guttural roar, he slammed his palms into the ground. The battlefield responded instantly. The earth heaved upward in violent spasms, jagged spires erupted like the teeth of a colossal beast, massive boulders ripped themselves from the dirt and hovered in the air as if awaiting his command. Zuko staggered back, panting, his own body bloody beyond reason. His left eye was swollen nearly shut, his lip torn open, blood running freely down his chest. His legs shook, threatening to give out beneath him, but his stance never wavered. His breath came in long, fiery hisses, steam almost rising from his lips. Fong rose unsteadily, his jaw broken and hanging at an odd angle, one eye swollen shut, but his fury lent him strength. He screamed a raw, jagged sound and with a violent motion, sent the hovering stones hurtling toward Zuko. The prince moved. He ducked the first, the boulder exploding behind him in a burst of shattered rock and molten sparks. He twisted, leaping over another, his arms snapping out to throw a stream of fire that incinerated shards midair. One massive rock slammed down where he had been a second earlier, sending up a geyser of dirt and stone fragments that shredded across his arms and face, tearing fresh cuts. Blood ran into his eyes, but he blinked it away, focusing. Fong stomped, and the earth bucked violently, a jagged fissure tearing toward Zuko like the maw of the world itself. The prince leapt high, spinning midair, his body a streak of fire and smoke, before he landed hard, rolling across the dirt. "You're finished, boy!" Fong spat, blood spraying from his broken mouth as he pulled up two immense pillars of earth and slammed them together like the jaws of a titan. Zuko raised his arms and bellowed, a torrent of flame exploding outward, carving through the earth and maw. The flames burst through, molten rock raining down around them, but still Fong came. The general charged, wielding chunks of stone as weapons, his fists coated in jagged rock that turned them into hammers. He swung with murderous force. The first blow clipped Zuko's ribs, and the prince felt them crack. Pain exploded through him, but he gritted his teeth and spat blood directly into Fong's face, then snapped to kick upward, his boot wreathed in fire, slamming into the general's chin. Fong's head snapped back, teeth flying. The general roared, staggered, then lunged again, grabbing Zuko by the throat with one rocky hand and slamming him into the ground. The impact rattled Zuko's skull, and stars danced across his vision. The world blurred, dirt and fire mixing in dizzying swirls. But even as Fong raised his other stone-coated fist to crush his skull, Zuko's body moved on instinct. His hands shot upward, flames bursting from his palms point-blank into Fong's face. The general screamed as fire seared across his ruined features, flesh peeling, skin blackening. He stumbled back, clawing at his face. Zuko scrambled up, blood pouring from his nose, coughing violently but refusing to fall. "This ends now," Zuko growled, voice ragged but burning with unbreakable resolve. He spread his arms wide, drawing deeply upon the ki reserves coursing within him, his body resonating with the warmth of the sun still high above the battlefield. The flames burst from him like a second skin, spiraling, consuming. Fire dragon's crimson lotus. Exploding flame blades. He roared as he charged, fists wreathed in spiraling blades of fire, every swing leaving trails of blazing arcs in the air. He struck once, Fong's arm was cleaved open, blood spraying, flesh seared to the bone. He struck again, Fong's chest split, fire boring through, ribs cracking under the force. The general staggered, coughing blood, trying to raise another wall of earth, but Zuko smashed through it with a scream, his fire tearing through stone like paper. He leapt, spinning, fists a blur of fiery blades, raining down on Fong. Each blow erupted in bursts of fire and blood, scorching flesh and splattering gore across the broken battlefield. At last, Zuko's final strike landed square across Fong's head. The explosion of flame and force crushed it sideways, a sickening crack echoing across the silence that followed. Blood, brain, and charred flesh sprayed in every direction. The general's body crumpled, twitching once, then lay still, smoke rising from the ruin that was once his face. Zuko stood over him, chest heaving, his body drenched in sweat, blood, and soot. His arms trembled as the fire faded from his fists. For a long moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant clash of their armies still fighting. Then Zuko, with his bloodied face twisted into a grimace, raised one trembling hand. Fire flickered to life in his palm, red and furious. He hurled it down upon Fong's corpse. The flames consumed the general, his body igniting, flesh popping and splitting as it blackened and crumbled. The smell of burning meat filled the air, thick and choking. Zuko did not look away. He watched until Fong was nothing but ash and charred bone fragments. Only then did he whisper, voice hoarse and ragged, but strong. "Your war ends here." And the Prince of the Fire Nation stood tall over the ruin of General Fong, his bloodied silhouette framed by smoke and fire, the legend of his rise carved into the very earth. The last of General Fong's body smoldered, his charred bones crumbling into ash beneath the blaze that Zuko himself had unleashed. The young prince swayed, the strength of his rage spent, the power of his ki finally demanding payment for what he had drawn forth. His knees buckled, his vision swam red, and with a final staggered step forward, Zuko collapsed onto the blackened dirt. His palms hit the ground first, trembling violently, then his chest. Blood mixed with soot as his face pressed into the warm, scorched soil. He tried to push himself up, but his body refused. His muscles burned, his ribs screamed, and the fire inside him sputtered weakly like a dying candle. His chest heaved, shallow and ragged, every breath tasting of smoke and iron. For a moment, silence lingered around him, an eerie lull in the heart of chaos. Then came the sound. A ripple tore through the battlefield. The Earth Kingdom soldiers who had been shouting their war cries only moments ago faltered, their voices breaking. Eyes that had been locked on the Fire Nation's lines now darted toward the center, where the blackened corpse of their general smoldered. Horror spread like wildfire. "General Fong," one soldier cried, voice cracking. Another screamed his name, but it wasn't a battle cry, it was a wail of disbelief, despair. Across their ranks, men wavered. Some froze mid-strike, their weapons dropping from limp hands. Others backed away, stumbling, tripping over corpses and the churned mud of battle. Fear, sharper than any blade, cut through their numbers. The sight of their commander burned alive before their eyes was not just the death of a man, it was the shattering of their will. On the Fire Nation's side, the opposite erupted. A roar rose up from their soldiers, deafening, rolling across the battlefield like thunder. "Prince Zuko! Prince Zuko!" they cried, voices blending into a single force. Firebenders shot gouts of flame into the air in raw exultation, the nightmarish haze above them glowing with ribbons of orange and red. Rhino riders slammed their lances against their shields, infantrymen raised their swords high, every voice feeding into the frenzy of triumph. The morale shift was immediate, palpable. Where the Earth Kingdom line began to fracture, the Fire Nation pressed harder. Catapults flung blazing projectiles that crashed into retreating earthbender formations, sending men screaming into flame. Firebenders surged forward, their blasts no longer defensive, but overwhelming and relentless. Zuko lay half-conscious, the world dimming in and out as he tried to lift his head. Through the haze, he saw the lines breaking, the Earth Kingdom men fleeing in waves. He caught a glimpse of soldiers abandoning their catapults, some throwing down their weapons, others simply running with terror etched into their faces. Blood dripped from his chin into the scorched soil. He coughed violently, each spasm sending a fresh wave of pain through his ribs. His arms quivered as he forced them beneath him, pushing against the earth, desperate not to lie broken while his men roared his name. His vision blurred again. "Rin," he rasped, though no one was near. "Lee, hold them. Don't let them." Another cough racked him, blood spilling past his lips. His body trembled as he pressed his cheek into the dirt, listening to the chaos unfolding around him. On the other side, the Earth Kingdom collapse grew worse. Deserters ran blindly, only to be cut down by advancing Fire Nation cavalry. Those who remained were swallowed in the tide of flame. Dust and blood choked the air, the smell of burning flesh thick, overwhelming. "Fall back! Fall back!" one captain screamed, his voice panicked. But even as he called the retreat, his men were already fleeing, stumbling over the corpses of their comrades, trampling each other in their desperation. Some tried to fight on, earthbenders slamming their fists down to raise desperate walls of stone. But Fire Nation catapults shattered them, fireballs crashing into the barriers and exploding them into shards of burning rock. The defenders screamed as they were engulfed, their lines breaking apart completely. Zuko groaned, his mind teetering on the edge of consciousness. He could hear it, the cries of retreat, the clashing weapons, the guttural roars of victory from his men. And though he could not stand, though he could barely even raise his head, a faint smile tugged at his bloodied lips. The legend had begun. Behind him, the chant grew louder. Prince Zuko! Prince Zuko! It wasn't just soldiers now, it was commanders, benders, every rank joining in, the name echoing across the battlefield with the weight of a conqueror. And on the other side, the Earth Kingdom army scattered. General Fong's men, once 4,000 strong, were nothing but a broken tide, dissolving into the plains as fire consumed their banners. The battle for Nanhai was not yet over, but its heart had been ripped out. And its heart was ash at Zuko's feet. Through the storm of noise and blood, a pair of figures broke through the chaos, cutting down anyone who dared approach the collapsed prince. Sergeant Rin's blade flashed crimson with fire, every strike brutal and precise as he hacked apart stragglers who stumbled too close. Beside him, Ensign Lee stumbled forward, face streaked with soot, dust, and blood, his eyes wide with the kind of focus born only of desperation. "Protect the prince!" Rin roared, voice breaking through the chaos as his sword split open the chest of an earthbender who had raised a jagged pillar of stone in an attempt to crush Zuko where he lay. The man crumpled, fire still smoldering in his mouth and eyes as his body fell beside the bloody prince. Lee darted in, dropping to his knees by Zuko's side. His hands, shaking with adrenaline, pressed against Zuko's blood-soaked chest and shoulder, trying to find a place where the prince wasn't torn or burned. "Prince Zuko!" he shouted over the chaos, but Zuko's only response was a ragged, bloody cough. "He's alive," Lee gasped, relief flashing through him, though the weight of it threatened to crush him. His eyes darted over the ruined body, the broken flesh, the cuts, the bruises deep enough to look black even beneath the gore. "Spirits, you're still alive. Focus!" Rin snarled, his sword lashing out again as he pivoted, the tip slicing through an enemy's throat in a spray of blood. He flung fire from his other hand, a roaring jet that burned 2 charging Earth soldiers alive before they could even scream. "Keep him awake, don't let him fade." Lee nodded frantically, leaning over Zuko, shaking his shoulder carefully. "My prince, stay with me. You can't fall now. Do you hear me? You've already," his voice cracked, "you've already won." Zuko groaned, his head turning slightly, one swollen eye half opening. His lips curled faintly, blood dribbling from the corner of his mouth. His voice was hoarse, fractured, but it carried enough for both to hear, "Not yet." Rin's blade clashed against stone, sparks erupting as an earthbender swung a jagged rock hammer at him. The sergeant gritted his teeth, twisting his wrist to redirect the blow, his sword glowing red-hot as he bent fire into the steel itself. With a guttural roar, Rin slashed upward, splitting the hammer and the man wielding it in one brutal stroke. "Hold on, Prince!" Rin barked, standing his ground over Zuko like a wall of fire and steel. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, blood spattered across his armor, but his stance never wavered. Lee bent closer, his voice shaking but urgent. "You said this would be the day your legend begins, don't you dare die now. Don't." His throat caught as Zuko's hand twitched weakly, bloody fingers brushing against his forearm. Zuko forced his mouth to move, each word sounding like it was being torn out of him. "I don't plan to die." The earth trembled suddenly, an enemy earthbender trying to sink them into a pit. But Rin anticipated it. He slammed his flaming sword into the ground, fire cracking through the earth and splitting the forming chasm apart. "Not today, bastard!" Rin snarled, finishing the man with a savage downward strike. Lee flinched, dust and embers spraying his face, but he held onto Zuko's arm tighter. "We've got you," he whispered fiercely, as if saying it enough would make it true. "We've got you. Just stay awake. Stay with us." Zuko coughed again, more blood painting his chin. His vision swam, but he forced one swollen eye to look up at Rin's burning silhouette and Lee's desperate face. His lips curled faintly again, a broken, bloody smirk. "Good," he rasped. "Protect me. Until it's over." Around them, the Fire Nation pushed harder, their morale soaring as the Earth Kingdom shattered into retreat. But at the very heart of it all, among smoke, fire, blood, and the fallen bodies of hundreds, Prince Zuko lay crumpled, alive by sheer force of will, his men shielding him with fire and steel, holding the line until his legend burned brighter still. Chapter 49, Long Live the Prince. The battlefield still smoldered. The cries of the wounded rose like a broken hymn above the crackle of burning catapults and the hiss of dying flames. Corpses lay half-buried in shattered earth, the soil blackened by fire and soaked through with blood until it became a thick, foul sludge. The stench of iron, ash, and death hung heavy. It was then that Admiral Tuvok arrived. Unlike the rest of the men, he was untouched by blood or soot. His armor was polished, his crimson cloak flowing behind him like a war banner of its own. Flanked by his personal guard of elite firebenders, he strode onto the battlefield as though he were stepping onto a parade ground. His boots crunched over charred remains without hesitation. His eyes, sharp, narrow, calculating, scanned the ruin of Nanhai with a commander's detachment, not the faintest flicker of pity in their depths. Form ranks, his voice cut like a blade through the haze. Extinguish stray fires, salvage what can be salvaged, strip the enemy dead of arms and armor. This province belongs to the Fire Nation now. I will have it cleansed and ordered before the moon rises. The men, ragged and exhausted, hesitated at first. Many had only just lowered their weapons, blood still dripping from their knuckles. But Tuvok's tone brooked no resistance. One by one, then in groups, squads snapped to their tasks, dragging wounded comrades into lines, executing earthbenders too slow to flee and taking others prisoner, piling corpses into smoldering heaps for burning. Catapult crews, recover what's intact, Tuvok barked, pointing toward the shattered lines of the Earth Kingdom siege machines. I want those stones recarved, wheels mended, and ropes rewoven before dawn. What the enemy left behind will serve us now. His guards relayed every word with the discipline of trained officers. Fire Nation soldiers, worn to the bone, their armor dented and uniforms scorched, found themselves working like oxen, driven forward by sheer will and the Admiral's commanding presence. Lieutenant Commander Donji approached, his face still streaked with grime and blood. Admiral, the enemy is routed. They won't regroup soon, not without Fong. Tuvok's gaze lingered on him only a moment before sweeping out across the chaos. The enemy is scattered, not destroyed. Despair can turn to defiance if left unchecked. Pursue those who fled. Hunt them through the hills, through the villages, leave no seed for rebellion to grow. Donji bowed, hesitating for just a second. And our own wounded, sir? Their survival depends on the strength of their comrades, Tuvok said flatly. The Fire Nation's future depends on victory, not pity. Triage them. Save those who can fight tomorrow. The rest, he let the words trail, his silence more damning than anything he might have said aloud. Rin, standing nearby with his sword still dripping crimson, clenched his jaw but said nothing. His eyes flicked to the men struggling to carry Zuko's stretcher toward the rear lines. Their prince still breathed, though shallowly, his body a ruin of cuts, burns, and bruises. Tuvok's gaze followed, narrowing. For a heartbeat he said nothing, only studied the stretcher as though weighing its worth. Finally, he spoke, voice smooth, almost oily. See that the Crown Prince is stabilized. His survival is essential for morale, if nothing else. He turned, cloak snapping in the evening wind. But do not mistake his reckless gamble for victory. The Fire Nation won today because I brought order to chaos. Because I brought reinforcements when you would have been overrun. His voice rose, carrying across the field so that nearby soldiers, even wounded ones, heard every word. Do not forget who commands this province now. Nanhai is mine to secure. The words stung. Rin's nostrils flared, Donji stiffened, and even Lee, still crouched at Zuko's side, sweat streaking his soot-stained face, felt the venom of them. But none spoke against the Admiral. Not yet. The battlefield was his stage, and every soldier too weary to raise a challenge. As the sun sank low, torches lit across the plain. Lines of Fire Nation troops marched through the ruin, spears and blades glinting red in the dusk. Fires devoured the corpses of the Earth Kingdom's fallen, their banners turned to ash that drifted upward into the darkening sky. And through it all, Admiral Kavak stood tall at the center, orchestrating the aftermath with the cold efficiency of a man who saw war not as tragedy, but as ledger, losses and gains tally without sentiment. Nanhai was his now. At least, that was what he meant everyone to believe. The stretcher jolted as the three soldiers carried it across uneven ground, their boots slipping in blood-soaked mud. Each lurch wrung a groan from Zuko, though his eyes never fully opened. His body was mangled, ribs bruised and cracked, skin split in deep burns and slashes, his armor a shredded ruin half clinging to him. Sweat mixed with blood, stinging his eyes even when he tried to keep them closed. The battlefield still roared somewhere behind him, but to Zuko, it was muffled, distant, like echoes underwater. "Careful!" Rin barked, walking beside the stretcher. His voice carried a hard edge, more protective than commanding. His hands twitched as though he wanted to seize the stretcher himself, but instead he kept his sword in one fist, blade still painted in red. He had learned the cruelty of battle well enough to know an injured prince made an easy target. His eyes scanned every shadow, every cluster of men, for threats that might still linger. Lee, soot-streaked and bruised, trudged at the other side. He kept glancing at Zuko, his scholarly face hardened with worry. "He's burning up," Lee muttered, reaching to brush damp strands of black hair from Zuko's bloody forehead. "This fever, if he doesn't receive treatment soon." "Shut it," Rin snapped, though not unkindly. "He's not dying. He's too damn stubborn to die." Zuko's lips curled into a ghost of a smile, though his voice was weak and slurred. "You sound so sure." The soldiers carrying him nearly stumbled at the realization he was still lucid. One muttered a prayer under his breath, another bit his lip hard, forcing himself to keep his grip steady. "Prince Zuko," Lee said, bending low so his voice could reach past the din of the march. "You shouldn't be speaking. Conserve your strength. Please." But Zuko forced his head to the side, eyes squinting half shut. Even blurred, he could still make out the burning landscape. Charred mounds of bodies. Fire Nation troops fanning across the plain in new formations under Kuvak's orders. The enemy routed, their banners in pieces, their catapults still smoldering husks. He had done this. Him, not Kuvak. And yet the Admiral was already stamping his name upon the victory, already turning the tide of narrative. Zuko spat blood to the side, his chest heaving. "Don't let him take everything." Rin leaned closer. "What do you mean, him?" Zuko's swollen lips cracked into something like a smirk. "Kuvak won't stop here." Lee's throat tightened. He remembered the way Kavak's voice had carried over the battlefield earlier, cold and commanding, already reshaping what had happened. He knew Zuko was right. They reached the rear lines at last, where makeshift tents had been erected from what remained of supply wagons. Here, the smell of burned flesh gave way to the acrid bite of poultices and boiled herbs. Medics rushed forward, their uniforms stained with blood, hands slick with it. "Lay him down, carefully," one healer ordered. The stretcher was lowered onto a bedroll, and the medics swarmed over him, slicing away the remains of his armor, dabbing at burns, applying salves that hissed when they met open flesh. Zuko hissed with them, his body jerking in reflex, but he clenched his teeth, forcing his voice down. Rin stood stiff at his side, arms folded, jaw tight. Lee knelt, refusing to leave until ordered. Donji, arriving moments later with his armor dented and cape tattered, took in the scene with a grim frown. "He fought like a demon," Donji muttered, low enough so only Rin and Lee heard. "I never thought I'd live to see a man make fire into a sun." If Kuvak tries to claim this day as his alone, he'll find many who remember otherwise. "Words won't matter if the Admiral weaves his own story fast enough," Rin growled, his eyes never leaving Zuko. "Soldiers obey the man who feeds them and commands them today, not the one who bled for them yesterday." Zuko stirred, hearing fragments of their whispers through the haze. His voice was raw, broken, yet it forced itself out. "I'll make sure they don't forget." Lee bent close again. "My prince, Please, save your strength. You've already pushed beyond. No, Zuko hissed, a flash of fire briefly curling from his lips with the word. His eyes, cracked with red veins, glowed with the faintest ember of defiance. If I die, if I fall, they'll remember Tuvok's order, not my fire. That cannot happen. It won't. Rin's hand clenched tighter on his sword hilt. For once, he said nothing. He simply bowed his head, a vow unspoken. Outside the tent, Tuvok's voice continued to thunder commands, reshaping the aftermath of the battle with each order. His soldiers moved with brutal precision, extinguishing dissent and carving their admiral's name into the province itself. But inside, the stretcher lay with Zuko still breathing, clinging to consciousness with sheer will alone. Bloodied, broken, but unyielding. The men closest to him, Rin, Lee, Donji, knew with every fiber of their being, so long as that fire still smoldered in his eyes, so long as his chest rose with each labored breath, this war was not Tuvok's to claim. It was his. Zuko's fingers, bloodied, trembling, yet still strong, clutched Lee's hand. His grip was desperate, the kind of hold that anchored not just a man, but a memory. His voice rasped from cracked lips, heavy with pain and conviction. Lee, what happened here today cannot be forgotten. Do you hear me? Even if I fall, even if they bury me in ash, this victory must never wear another man's name. Lee's throat tightened as he bent low, his face inches from the prince's battered one. He could smell the copper of blood, the smoke clinging to Zuko's skin. I hear you, my prince, Lee whispered, his voice breaking with something between fear and reverence. Zuko's grip loosened, his eyes flickering closed as exhaustion pulled him under again. But the fire in those words lingered, hot and undeniable. Lee sat frozen for a moment, his hand still cradling Zuko's, before he finally pulled away. He turned to Rin and Donji, who both stood stiff and silent, watching their prince with grim respect. Excuse me, gentlemen, Lee murmured, voice steady now, but his eyes alight with something fierce. Neither Rin nor Donji moved to stop him. They only followed him with their gaze as he stepped past the medics, past the cluster of soot-stained soldiers lingering near the triage tent. His boots crunched over shattered stone and blackened earth as he made his way toward a jagged outcropping of rock, one torn and bent high during the chaos of battle. The wind carried the acrid stench of fire and blood, but Lee felt none of it. He climbed, pulling himself higher, until he stood above the battered assembly of Fire Nation men, thousands of them still catching their breath, still alive by sheer chance, their armor dented, their eyes hollow with the shock of survival. Lee raised both arms wide, and his voice rang out over the field, raw but unshaking. Soldiers of the Fire Nation, he cried, and dozens of tired heads turned. Then hundreds. Then more. Lee's chest swelled as he looked at them, their soot-streaked faces, their weary postures. You saw it with your own eyes. You stood here and bore witness to fire turned into a sun itself. You watched your crown prince bleed for you, fight for you, nearly die for you. It was not another who broke General Fong. It was not me, nor Donji, nor Rin. It was him, our prince, who faced the giant alone and struck him down. The murmurs rippled through the crowd like sparks on dry tinder. Helmets lifted, shoulders straightened. He is more than heir to the throne, Lee continued, his voice rising against the wind. He is proof that the Fire Nation is unstoppable. He is proof that our blood burns hotter, fiercer, than any earth that dares rise against us. Remember this day. Burn it into your minds and your hearts. Let no man or admiral or officer steal it from you. His fist struck against his chest plate, ringing out with a metallic crack. When you speak of Nanhai, you speak of Zuko. When you remember this victory, you remember the prince who turned his body into fire and seared a legend into the bones of the earth itself. A roar began at the front, one voice, then another. Then 100. Then thousands. The chant grew, deep and pounding, until the very battlefield trembled with it. Long live the prince! The shout echoed, again and again, shaking the very stones. Men bloodied and limping raised their fists. Firebenders still smoking from their own strikes let flames dance over their palms. Cavalrymen banged weapons against shields. Even those too wounded to stand raised their voices, hoarse and ragged, but loud enough to join the tide. Long live the prince! Inside the command circle, Admiral Kuvok stood stiff as the chant reached his ears. His jaw tightened, his hands clasped behind his back. He stared toward the rock where Lee stood, bellowing still, his voice swallowed by the chants of the army. Kuvok's eyes narrowed. He did not miss the sting. The battle had been won, but in the eyes of the men, the glory belonged not to him. It belonged to the battered boy carried on a stretcher, the boy he was meant to watch, to control. The chant swelled once more, louder than before. Long live the prince! Long live the prince! And in that moment, there was no doubt, Nanhai's victory belonged to Zuko. Chapter 51, Prodigal Son Returns. The tea-house was silent except for the faint crackle of the hearth and the muted whisper of the wind brushing against the paper windows. Iroha's chest rose and fell unevenly, his hands trembling where they gripped the edge of the wooden table. Before him sat a man who could not, who should not, exist. Yet the golden eyes, the set of the jaw, the timbre of his voice. Lu Ten, the name broke from Iroh like a prayer, hoarse, uncertain, desperate. It cannot be you. I buried you. I held your ashes in my hands. The man smirked faintly, though it was devoid of warmth. Ashes? Perhaps that's all you ever saw me as. A pile of regrets to drink away with tea. Iroh flinched at the words, as if struck. His mouth opened, then closed again, his normally unflappable calm shattering like thin porcelain. I mourned you every day since Ba Sing Se. Every sunrise I prayed for your spirit. Every night I dreamed you were still here. And now you stand before me, mocking me? Lu Ten leaned back in his chair, folding his scarred arms over his chest. His face was familiar yet hardened, carved with lines that spoke of years spent far from comfort. And what did all that mourning achieve, father? Did it stop the war? Did it change anything? Did your tears bring me back? He scoffed. No. While you drank tea and sang proverbs, the world moved on. You stayed behind. Tao, seated beside him, drummed his fingers lazily on the wood, his gaze darting between them like a predator watching a slow kill. General, ghosts have a way of returning when you least expect it. Iroh ignored Tao, his entire focus locked on the man across from him. His throat was dry, his voice trembling as he forced the words out. If you are my son, then tell me, where have you been? Why did you not return to me? Why let me believe you were dead? Lu Ten's golden eyes narrowed, a flicker of something unreadable flashing within them. Because the boy you remembered as Lu Ten died on those walls. Whatever returned from that hell was not your son. Not anymore. The weight of the statement pressed against Iroha's chest, and for the first time in decades, the dragon of the West felt truly powerless. He reached out across the table, his large, callous hand trembling as he extended it toward his son. No matter what you've endured, you are my flesh, my blood. Nothing changes that. Come home, Lu Ten. Whatever bitterness you carry, we can. Lu Ten's hand lashed out, slapping his father's away with a force that echoed in the quiet tea-house. The sting ran deeper than skin. Home? His voice dripped with scorn. You speak of home as if you didn't abandon it. As if you didn't abandon me. Iroha's eyes widened. I never abandoned you. I led the siege for you. I would have torn down the walls of Ba Sing Se stone by stone if it meant saving you. Then why didn't you? Lu Ten snapped, slamming his palm on the table. Why did you retreat? Why did you slink back to the Fire Nation in disgrace instead of burning the Earth Kingdom to the ground for what they did? His voice grew louder, harsher, vibrating with the fury of years. Because you are weak, father. Weak then, weak now. The words cut deeper than any blade. Iroh, who had faced down armies and spirits, sat frozen, staring at the son he loved beyond measure and who now regarded him with nothing but contempt. Tao smirked, leaning back in his chair. You see, General, he's not the boy you lost. He's the man forged in fire and ash while you sipped tea and told stories. This is the Lieutenant the Fire Nation needs, not the grieving father's memory. Iroha's voice cracked, uncharacteristic, raw. What have they done to you? Who has filled your heart with such poison? Lu Ten's lips curled into a grim smile, though his eyes held no joy. No one needed to poison me, father. The truth was enough. The truth of how hollow your honor is. Of how your wisdom is nothing but excuses for cowardice. He leaned forward, close enough that Iroh could see the flecks of red in his weary eyes. Do you know what it's like to die choking on earth and fire? To cry out for your father, and no one comes? Iroh's heart clenched. His hands shook as he whispered, I am here now. I came too late, but I am here. Too late, Lu Ten repeated softly, almost mockingly, before leaning back. Always too late. That is your legacy. The words landed heavier than cannon fire, and Iroh sat stunned, unable to respond. The tea house seemed to shrink around him, the air thick with smoke and bitterness. Tao rose smoothly, placing a hand on Lu Ten's shoulder. Enough for now. The general has much to think about. He gave Iroh a wolfish grin. Rest easy, Dragon of the West. The dead do not always stay buried, and neither do their sins. Lu Ten stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He did not look back at his father as he walked toward the door, only pausing once to speak without turning. Do not follow me, father. If you do, you will see just how much of your son truly died. The door slid shut behind him, leaving Iroh in the suffocating silence of the tea house. His hands trembled violently, his eyes stung with unshed tears, and for the first time in many years, the mighty general bowed his head. He had won countless battles. But in this moment, Iroh felt utterly defeated. Iroh's hands trembled as he sat in the tea house, Lu Ten's final words echoing through his chest like a drumbeat of loss. His breath came in uneven gusts, the weight of disbelief and heartbreak pressing down on him until he felt he might suffocate. But then, rage. A hot, choking anger that burned through the sorrow like wildfire. Too many questions clawed at him. How was his son alive? Where had he been? Why did he speak with such venom? Who had twisted him into this stranger? The Dragon of the West surged to his feet, the table legs screeching against the wooden floor. The teacups rattled, one falling and shattering against the ground. The murmurs of the patrons rose, but Iroh ignored them. He strode out into the street, the cool evening air stinging his face as his eyes swept across the thinning crowd. There. Tao and Lu Ten walked side by side, their cloaks swaying as they moved with deliberate calm through the road. Lu Ten! Iroh's voice cut like steel across the quiet town. Heads turned, whispers rose, but Iroh did not care. His chest heaved as he stormed toward them, his heavy boots striking the earth like war drums. Both men stopped. Tao's shoulders stiffened, and Lu Ten turned slowly, his expression unreadable, but the faint curl of disdain tugged at his lips. Iroh pointed a trembling hand at them. Enough riddles. Enough shadows. You will give me answers, here and now. Do not think me the same grieving man you left behind. If you will not speak, then I will remind you why they once feared the Dragon of the West. The threat rang out sharp as steel. Gasps spread through the gathering crowd, villagers and travelers alike backing away. Lu Ten's eyes flickered to Tao, who smirked knowingly. Tao stepped forward, his voice smooth and oily. General, if you wish answers, then follow. Some truths are not for prying ears. Iroh's jaw clenched, his breath heavy. At last, he gave a sharp nod. Very well. But if this is another trick, another half-truth, I will not restrain myself again. Tao only smirked. Then let us test how far restraint takes you. They led him into a narrow alleyway, its walls high and worn, the shadows thick. The clamor of the street faded behind them until only the echo of their footsteps remained. At last, they stopped, the dim lantern light flickering against the cracked stone. Lu Ten turned, his cloak falling back from his shoulders. His posture was regal, commanding, yet harsh, sharper than Iroh remembered. The warmth that had once lit his son's eyes was gone, replaced by cold steel. Honor. Legacy. Power, Lu Ten began, his voice firm, deliberate. These are the foundations upon which our nation was built. They are the inheritance of the royal line. And you, he jabbed a finger at Iroh's chest, disgraced them all. Iroh stiffened, his own voice rising. I led the siege of Ba Sing Se. I bled for the Fire Nation. I lost everything for it, even you. You lost me, Lu Ten spat, because you were too weak to finish what you began. You should have razed the city to ash. You should have carved our mark into the Earth Kingdom forever. Instead, you returned broken, a coward, letting Ozai take what should have been yours. His voice deepened, venomous. You abandoned the crown, father. You abandoned destiny. You abandoned me. Iroh's fists tightened, his breath sharp. You dare speak to me of destiny? You speak of crowns as if they were toys. You think wearing it gives power? Ozai is ruthless, yes, but he holds strength. The Fire Nation is not so easily taken. And Zuko, his voice cracked with sudden urgency, Zuko carries a flame that may yet burn brighter than us all. Lu Ten laughed, a low, humorless sound. Zuko? That sniveling boy? I saw his temper tantrums, his failures. A scar does not make a king. He is nothing compared to me. Iroh's golden eyes flared. He has already achieved what you dismiss. He has bled, fought, and won victories no one believed possible. You know nothing of the man he has become. Tao stepped forward then, his tone sharp. It doesn't matter what the boy has done. Ozai's time is over. The fire that crowns him flickers low, even if he does not see it. The throne is already shifting. He leaned close, his grin wolfish. Our work ensures it. Iroh froze, eyes narrowing. Our work. What are you saying? Tao tilted his head toward Lu Ten. I am saying, old general, that the crown will return to its rightful heir. That the boy you once buried is the man who will lead the Fire Nation into its true destiny. Lu Ten's chin rose, his voice resonant, cold with conviction. The age of Ozai ends. The age of Lu Ten begins. And if you are too blind, too soft, too weak to see it, then step aside. Iroh's heart thundered. His eyes darted between them, his son, twisted by pride and fury, and Tao, the viper whispering in his ear. Every instinct screamed in him to unleash his fire, to tear away the shadows binding his boy. Yet beneath the anger, sorrow surged, heavy and suffocating. He stared hard into Lu Ten's eyes, searching desperately for even a flicker of the warmth he once knew. But all he saw was flame, harsh, consuming, merciless. Lu Ten, Iroh whispered, his voice raw. My son, what have you become? Iroh's fists clenched, the heat already rippling off his skin, his breath coming in controlled but furious waves. His golden eyes locked onto Tao, and for a moment the calm mask that had always defined him shattered. You, Iroh growled, his voice guttural, filled with venom. You think I don't see it? The poison in his words, the twisting of my son into the shadow? I'll burn it out of you, viper. I'll tear your lies from his ears myself. Tao smirked, tilting his head with lazy mockery. Blame me if it eases your shame, general. But the truth. Enough! Iroh roared. With a surge of fury, the dragon of the west unleashed himself. His arms swept in a devastating arc, and an explosion of fire thundered from his palms, hotter and brighter than the lanterns could bear. The blast smashed into Tao's chest like a cannon, lifting him off his feet and hurling him into the far wall. The stone cracked, fragments raining down as Tao slumped, coughing through smoke, his robe singed and torn. The alley itself shook from the force, and the air reeked of scorched stone and ash. Villagers at the far end gasped and fled, too terrified to linger near the wrath of the Fire Nation's infamous dragon. But the moment of triumph was fleeting. A blur of motion, a flash of boots against stone. "Over here!" Lu Ten's voice was a bark of rage, and before Iroh could reset his stance, a boot slammed into his chest. It was a perfect back kick, driven by both speed and raw fury. The impact cracked ribs and stole Iroh's breath as he was lifted from his feet and hurled backward. His body crashed against the opposite wall, the stone biting into his back before he crumpled to the ground. Pain raged through him, white-hot, leaving him gasping, groaning as blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. His vision swam, the world spinning, but through it all he saw his son, tall, proud, merciless, advancing step by step. Lu Ten's shadow fell over him, blotting out the dim lantern light. His voice was steady, cruelly calm, each word deliberate. "It was me all along. All a ruse I had concocted." Iroh blinked through the haze, his hands twitching as he tried to rise, but his body screamed in protest. "You thought me dead," Lu Ten continued, pacing before him like a predator. "You thought Ba Sing Se had swallowed me whole. But I survived. I chose to let you believe I had fallen. I had help, allies with vision, who understood the greater purpose. My death was a mask, Father. A mask meant to drive you into greatness." His golden eyes blazed, cruelly familiar. "I wanted my death to fuel you, to harden your heart, to crush the Earth Kingdom without mercy, to carve our destiny into stone and flame. And then, when you returned victorious, taken over from Azulon. When you grew fat with complacency, I would have revealed myself. I would have taken the crown, as it was always meant to be." Iroh's throat tightened as he tried to speak, but Lu Ten's voice rolled over him, cold and merciless. "But you failed me." His words were daggers. "Instead of seizing Ba Sing Se, you broke. Instead of claiming the Fire Lord's mantle, you ran. You returned with nothing but shame and ashes, letting Ozai steal what should have been yours, ours." His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You abandoned the throne. You abandoned honor. You abandoned me." Iroh coughed, blood splattering the dirt, his voice hoarse but defiant. "You don't understand. I lost more than you know. I lost everything. The crown is meaningless compared to the lives. Spare me your weakness." Lu Ten snarled, cutting him off. He leaned close, his face twisted with scorn. "Mother would have been disgraced by your actions. She had so much hope for your greatness, when you spared the last living dragons and lied about killing them. She had your back, she returned with you to the Fire Nation to become queen. You just didn't care, did you? You may not have cared for the crown, but I do. It is my birthright, as the firstborn son of the crown prince of the Fire Nation. And I will not squander it like you did. I will take it all back. The crown, the throne, the destiny. It belongs to me, it always has." Iroh's eyes widened, his voice trembling. "Lu Ten, my son, this path will consume you." Lu Ten straightened, looming over him like a dark mirror of the man Iroh once was. His lips curled into a cruel smile. "Then let it consume me. Better a fire that devours than an ember that fades. I will be the Fire Lord the world remembers. Not you. Not Ozai. Not Zuko. Me." His words hung in the alley, heavy as smoke. Tao stirred in the shadows, clutching his scorched chest, a smile tugging at his lips despite the pain. And Iroh, broken against the wall, felt a despair deeper than any battlefield loss. For the greatest war he had ever fought was no longer against nations, but against his own blood. Chapter 54, Birthplace of Avatar Roku. The ship creaked and groaned beneath its own weight, each timber whispering against the sea as the Fire Nation vessel cut clean through the black waves. Night had long since fallen, and the sky above was veiled in scattered stars. The air was cool, carrying the sharp tang of salt, a sharp contrast to the heat that still lingered on Zuko's skin. He descended the ladder to the lower deck slowly, each step deliberate, his muscles still burning faintly from more than just the therapy he had endured above. Sweat clung to his bandages, though it was not from battle, and in a haze of exhaustion and satisfaction, his mind was clearer than it had been in days. For a brief span of time, he had forgotten pain, forgotten blood, forgotten Fong's laughter and the weight of the crimson purgatory he had called forth. Now, however, he was once again the prince. The moment he entered his quarters, the lantern light bathed him in warm gold. Maps of Crescent Island and surrounding seas lay scattered across the table, half-marked with charcoal notations of possible approaches. A brazier glowed faintly in the corner, fire whispering against iron. Zuko sat heavily on a stool, leaning forward, his elbows resting against the table. He exhaled through his nose, his body finally cooling, but his mind racing. A knock at the door cut through the silence. "Enter," Zuko said curtly, his voice still rough, though steady. Sergeant Rin stepped inside, his posture as sharp as ever despite the subtle fatigue that lined his scarred face. His armor bore new scratches, his red sash tied slightly loose, a man who hadn't taken rest since Nanhai. He bowed briefly before speaking. "My prince," Rin began, tone crisp, "we've been monitoring our course closely since we set sail. With the winds at our back, the ship is making better time than expected. If nothing interrupts us, we'll arrive at Crescent Island by tomorrow evening, more than a day to spare before the solstice." Zuko's lips pulled into the faintest of smirks. "Good. I told you it was possible." Rin allowed himself a grunt that might have been amusement, though his face betrayed nothing. "Possible, yes. But only if nothing else crosses our path. There are still Earth Kingdom raiding ships prowling in these waters. And we both know Crescent Island isn't just a pilgrimage ground. There are old things there. Things men whisper about." Zuko leaned back, wincing as his ribs pulled under their wrappings. "Let them whisper. Crescent Island is exactly where we need to be. The spirits chose it for a reason. It's where the Avatar is supposed to find his guidance. Instead, it's where I'll claim mine." Rin's brow furrowed as he stepped further into the cabin. "You speak as if the island is a promise, my lord. But I need more than riddles to keep the men in line. They'll follow you into hell. You proved that at Nanhai, but even soldiers can only bleed for shadows for so long. What's waiting for us there?" Zuko met his eyes, golden fire glinting in the lantern's light. "Power," he said simply. "Answers. The kind that will make sure I never crawl before men like Fong again." Rin studied him for a long moment, then nodded, though the doubt didn't leave his face entirely. "Very well. But I'll hold you to it, Prince Zuko. If Crescent Island is a grave instead of salvation, the blood will be on your hands." Zuko gave a humorless chuckle, his voice low and cold. "Then let it be. I've carried worse." The two men locked gazes, the room thick with unspoken understanding. Zuko had chosen his path. Rin, as always, would walk it with him, but not without his warnings. Outside, the waves surged, carrying them ever closer to the island that waited like a silent sentinel against the horizon. Rin lingered, arms folded against his chest, the scar down his jaw dark in the lamplight. He was silent for a beat too long before finally speaking, his tone low, deliberate. "This power you speak of, my prince, what is it exactly?" His eyes narrowed, studying Zuko's face as if searching for cracks. "You talk as though Crescent Island holds something beyond fire and stone. And with Princess Azula aboard, I must ask, are you certain she won't sink her claws into whatever it is you're seeking?" Zuko straightened, pushing back his shoulders despite the tight pull of his bandages. His expression hardened, though there was a flicker of fire in his eyes that wasn't anger so much as conviction. "You're right to ask," Zuko said, his voice cutting through the silence. "But Azula won't interfere. Not this time." Rin raised a brow. "And why not? She's watched you closer than anyone since Nanhai. I'd wager she knows you're holding something back, even if she doesn't understand what it is. That girl was born to sniff out weakness and exploit it. What's to stop her from watching you even on Crescent Island?" Zuko let out a quiet breath, not quite a sigh, but close, before standing and pacing to the far wall, his hand brushing the edge of a rolled parchment map. He stared at the firelight dancing in the brazier before speaking, his voice quieter but sharper than steel. Because Crescent Island isn't just another rock in the sea. It is where Avatar Roku was born, my grandfather. His hand curled into a fist at his side. The Fire Sages built their temple there, not for the Fire Nation, but for the Avatar himself. For centuries, they've guarded its shrines, preserved its flames, and waited for the moments when the cycle demanded answers. Crescent Island isn't just important, it is sacred. A shrine not just to Roku, but to the very idea of the Avatar, to all the past Avatars. Rin frowned slightly, absorbing this, but said nothing. Zuko turned, his eyes catching the light, glowing faintly in the shadows. Azula won't know what I do there, because no one will. As far as anyone else is concerned, Crescent Island is nothing but another step in my obsession with the Avatar cycle, another one of my fixations on past Avatars, their mistakes, their teachings. That's all the men need to know. That's all Azula needs to know. But what truly happens there will be mine alone. The silence stretched. Rin's fingers drummed lightly against his bracer, his gaze thoughtful. You ask us to trust you on blind faith, then. To follow you into a place none of us understand, where even the Fire Sages themselves are said to walk with shadows at their heels. Not blind faith, Zuko corrected, his voice sharp. He stepped closer, his presence pressing like a weight. Earned faith. You saw what I did at Nanhai. You saw me stand against Fong when no one else could. You saw me bleed, break, and still rise. That's not obsession, Rin. That's resolve. Crescent Island is the next step. And when I come out of it, he leaned in, his eyes burning with something deeper, hungrier. I'll be more than I am now. More than even Azula can grasp. Rin met his gaze evenly, his scarred face hard but not unmoved. And if she senses it? If she suspects you're moving beyond her reach? You know better than anyone, Azula doesn't tolerate being left in the dark. Zuko's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. Then let her suspect. Let her gnash her teeth and sharpen her claws. She can't stop me. Not on Crescent Island. That place is tied to me in ways she can never claim. Roku's blood runs in me stronger than in her, I am certain. The brazier crackled, spitting embers that briefly lit the tension hanging in the air. Rin inclined his head slowly, almost reluctantly. Very well, my prince. You've made your choice. I'll see to it the men only hear what they're meant to hear. Your obsession will be their explanation. But mark my words, Azula will be watching. She always is. Zuko turned back to the maps, his fingers tracing the jagged outline of Crescent Island. His voice was quiet, but it carried like fire through smoke. Let her watch. She'll see only what I want her to see. The rest is mine. The ship groaned beneath them, waves slamming against its iron hull, carrying them forward across the vast and restless sea. Ahead, unseen but drawing ever closer, Crescent Island waited. 2 days later, the sea stretched wide and endless, a gleaming expanse of shifting blue that shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. The ship cut through the waves with steady purpose, its steel hull gleaming, banners snapping in the salt-heavy breeze. The air carried the tang of sulfur now, faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind like a warning. Zuko stood at the ship's balcony, his hands resting on the railing, his bandaged body held upright through will more than strength. The horizon had finally revealed what he had been waiting for, a dark silhouette rising jagged against the orange-tinged sky. Crescent Island. Its volcanic spine jutted upward, sharp and brutal, smoke curling from the blackened crater at its peak. The slopes of the volcano were streaked with rivers of cooled obsidian rock, broken here and there by glowing cracks of molten fire that pulsed faintly, as though the island itself breathed. To the south, the land bent in a sweeping arc that gave the island its crescent shape, cradling a sheltered bay. Stone docks thrust outward from the bay like jagged spears, blackened by centuries of volcanic soot. And nestled into the inner curve of the island, carved directly into the rock, rose the temples and shrines, towering, angular structures crowned with dragon-headed spires, their red-painted eaves scarred but eternal against the mountain's wrath. Statues of long-dead avatars, their features eroded by time and ash, guarded the causeway leading to the great fire sage temple at the island's heart. Sergeant Rin stood to Zuko's right, his scarred face impassive as his gaze traced the dark, towering volcano. To Zuko's left, Azula leaned against the railing, the afternoon sun catching in her golden eyes, turning them to polished coins. Her lips curved into that sharp smirk of hers as she broke the silence. "Well, brother," she drawled, her tone silk over steel. "So this is Crescent Island. Home of shrines, sages, and smoke-belching rocks. Tell me," she flicked her fingers toward the silhouette of the fire sage temple in the distance, "is this part of our arrangement? Or is this simply another one of your endless obsessions with past avatars and their oh-so-profound legacies?" Zuko didn't flinch. His eyes stayed fixed on the black plume rising from the volcano's crown. "Does it matter?" Azula tilted her head, studying him, her smirk deepening. "It matters if this island is just another stage for you to indulge in history lessons with dusty old sages. While you sit around listening to stories of men long dead, the Avatar slips further from our grasp. Was this really your brilliant plan, brother? Another shrine, another obsession?" Zuko finally turned, his gaze sharp, voice low but unyielding. "It's all part of the plan. Every step. Crescent Island isn't a distraction. It's a foundation." He leaned closer, his bandaged hands tightening against the railing. "You wanted to be part of this? Then trust my process. You'll be there when I need you. Until then, let me worry about what matters." Azula's smirk faltered, her eyes narrowing into something colder. "Trust," she repeated, her tone mocking the word as though it were a joke. "That's a dangerous thing to ask of me, Zuzu. You know I don't give it freely." Zuko met her gaze, unwavering. "You don't have to. Just don't get in my way." The two siblings held each other's stare, their words hanging like drawn blades in the salt-scorched air. Rin shifted uncomfortably beside them but kept his silence, the tension between the royal heirs palpable. At last, Azula turned back toward the island, her smirk restored though thinner than before. "Very well. I'll play along, for now. But you'd better make all this smoke and fire worth the trouble." The ship groaned as it adjusted course, angling into the Crescent Bay. The island loomed larger now, every detail sharper, the cracked basalt cliffs scarred by centuries of eruptions, the ancient causeways leading to shrines where fire sages once bowed before flames, the volcanic ash that coated the air itself with a faint haze. Smoke twisted in the sky above like a serpent, blotting out the sun in shifting veils of shadow. Zuko's hand lingered on the railing, his jaw set like stone. Crescent Island was not merely a destination. It was a threshold. And once he stepped onto its volcanic shores, nothing, not Azula, not Kavak, not even Ozai, would keep him from what lay within. Chapter 55, Crescent Island Arrival. The docks of Crescent Island stretched out like blackened claws into the ocean, carved from obsidian rock and reinforced with Fire Nation timber. Smoke from the great volcano rose lazily into the sky above, a single dark plume against the setting sun. Shrines dotted the coastline, their crimson banners fluttering against the warm sea wind, while further inland the temples rose, sharp lines of stone and fire, a monument built to honor Avatar Roku and the cycle he embodied. The sound of boots meeting the wooden pier echoed as Zuko descended the gangplank first, flanked closely by Sergeant Rin and Azula, with Lieutenant Commander Donji and several officers behind them. His bandages were mostly hidden beneath his formal armor, though his posture betrayed the remnants of his injuries. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of sulfur. Waiting at the base of the dock was a small group of men in crimson robes, their flame-crested hoods drawn back. Grand Sage Yoriku stood at the center, tall and austere despite his years, with Renji, the young scholar-eyed sage, at his side. Meitu ***, the broad-shouldered traditionalist, and Duan, ever rigid and stern, completed the line. Their faces were composed, but there was no denying the flicker of surprise when they saw the Crown Prince himself stepping onto the dock. "Prince Zuko," Yoriku said, bowing deeply, his long sleeves brushing against the wood. It has been scarcely over 2 weeks since we last stood in your presence at the ceremony of your investiture. To see you here, so far from the capital, is unexpected. Renji, unable to mask his expression, added quickly, but welcome. Always welcome. The shrine of Roku stands ready for you, as it has for all princes who seek wisdom in the line of avatars. Meitu inclined his head, though his tone was weighted. We had not been told to expect a royal visit. That you come here without escort from the capital. His eyes darted briefly to Azula, then back to Zuko. It is unusual. Zuko's steps slowed as he came before them, his amber eyes gleaming faintly in the shadow of the volcano. For a heartbeat, he let the silence hang, allowing them to feel the weight of his presence. Unusual, perhaps, he said finally, his voice steady, but necessary. The path I walk is not one I will share with every general and courtier in the capital. You four know better than most why Crescent Island matters. Why the fire sages matter. Azula shifted subtly at his side, her expression unreadable, though her gaze flickered with suspicion. Rin, silent and sharp, stood behind Zuko like a shadow. Yoriku's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. You honor us with your presence, Crown Prince. I had wondered whether your fascination with our order would fade once your crown was secured. I see now it is not. Zuko met his gaze without wavering. My fascination, as you call it, is not idle curiosity. What lies here, in these stones, in the fire of Roku's spirit, it is part of my destiny. I will not waste time explaining it. Only know that I came because I chose to. The other sages exchanged looks, Duan's brow furrowed, Maida's mouth set in a thin line, Renji's eyes brightening with excitement. Then we are glad, Renji said, almost eagerly. We have studied long for moments such as this, when one of royal blood seeks not only power but knowledge. Meitu added more cautiously, and yet, we must be clear, knowledge comes with burden. The wisdom of the avatars is not gentle. It can wound the unprepared. Zuko's mouth tightened into something that might have been a smirk. If I feared wounds, sage, I would have stayed in the capital wrapped in silk and comfort. I did not come here for ease. I came because I know what waits for me is not gentle but necessary. That silenced them for a moment. Even Duan, ever the rigid voice of tradition, gave a small nod of respect. Grand Sage Yoriku finally gestured with his sleeve. Then come, Prince Zuko. The temple of Roku awaits. Its fires have burned for generations, untouched by storm or war. And in its flames, perhaps, you will find what you seek. As they turned toward the great stone stair that wound up the cliffs, the banner snapped in the wind. Azula leaned in slightly, her voice low, meant only for Zuko. You have them eating out of your hand already, she said with dry amusement. Do you plan to tell them what this really is, or keep them guessing with riddles? Zuko didn't look at her. His eyes were already on the temple above, its spires framed by the bleeding sky. Let them guess, he said. It will make their faith in me stronger when the truth comes. Azula's lips quirked, though her suspicion lingered. Rin, walking just behind them, caught the exchange and said nothing. His eyes, however, were wary, as though he already sensed the storm to come. From the line of crimson robes, another figure stepped forward, his armor gleaming red and gold against the waning light. The man bowed deeply, his voice carrying the clipped edge of military discipline. Crown Prince Zuko. I am Commander Yoser, charged with the defense and operation of Crescent Island. It is the highest honor to welcome you here. He straightened, square jaw set with pride. Your arrival was unexpected, but the men are already speaking of it. News of Nanhai spreads faster than ships on the wind. The soldiers here have heard the tales of your victory and of how you did it. Azula's eyes narrowed slightly, but Yoser pressed on, his words meant as praise, not provocation. They say the battle began with you calling a second down upon the Earth Kingdom ranks as if from the heavens themselves. That you bent the flames not as a weapon, but as a sea, swallowing entire legions in waves of fire. And that, when the enemy tried to rally, you conjured a sea of fire. The men here whisper the story like it's already a saga. The sages shifted uneasily at those words. Even Mida's stern composure cracked, his brows rising. Renji, wide-eyed, whispered as if unable to help himself, "A son, born of firebending." Grand Sage Yoriku's gaze lingered on Zuko with new weight. Legends tend to grow in the retelling. And yet, there is truth in them, is there not, my prince? Zuko met their eyes, one by one, his face set like stone. Nanhai was fire. The Earth Kingdom wanted to see what the Crown Prince of the Fire Nation was capable of. So I showed them. Commander Yosur's fist struck his breastplate in salute. And the world will remember it. Even here, across the sea, your name rises like a banner. Men speak it with awe and fear. You have given them both, as a true prince should. Azula tilted her head, her smirk sharpening. Careful, Commander. Keep talking like that and my brother's head may swell too large to fit through the temple doors. Zuko ignored her jab. His eyes returned to the sages, his voice calm but edged with fire. What happened in Nanhai was not chance. Nor was it luck. It was necessity. The Fire Nation cannot win this war with half measures. The Earth Kingdom is vast, stubborn, and unyielding. They need to be broken, not battered. Fire is not gentle, it is consuming. I made sure Nanhai understood that. The sages murmured among themselves. Renji's hands practically shook with excitement, while Duan's lips pressed thin in disapproval. Such displays of power, Duan finally said, his tone hard. They inspire fear, yes, but fear can be fickle. Too much of it, and it corrodes loyalty as much as it enforces it. Unless it is wielded properly, Yoriku countered softly, his aged eyes never leaving Zuko. The prince did not simply destroy. He conquered. And conquest, Sage Duan, breeds order where chaos once festered. Commander Yosur nodded firmly. My men speak of it as though the spirits themselves answered your call, Prince Zuko. Whether or not that is true does not matter. What matters is that they believe it. Azula let out a quiet laugh, folding her arms. And so my brother is already halfway to sainthood in their eyes. All because he set half of Nanhai on fire. Zuko's gaze cut toward her, steady and unflinching. Better they see fire as glory than weakness. His attention turned back to the sages. You asked if the tales were true. They are. And I tell you this, what I did in Nanhai will not be the last time fire is reshaped into something greater than battle itself. You will see it again. The words hung in the air like sparks ready to ignite. The sages exchanged glances, some wary, some intrigued, but all unable to deny the force behind his conviction. Grand Sage Yoriku inclined his head at last, his tone measured. Then perhaps the spirits guided your steps here, Crown Prince. For Roku's shrine is not only stone and flame, it is legacy. And legacy, like fire, is what we leave burning behind us. The procession began its climb toward the temple, the sages leading the way, Commander Yosur at Zuko's side. Azula lingered behind him, her smirk never fading, though her eyes were calculating as ever. Rin, walking at Zuko's shoulder, caught his prince's eye briefly. The sergeant said nothing, but there was pride in his silence. The path to Roku's temple wound upward, and with each step, the chants of distant Fire Nation soldiers drifted from the base below, already whispering the tale of Nanhai's burning sun. The climb wound upward in a solemn procession, the temple rising like a spear of flame against the crimson sky. Its tiers of golden eaves gleamed as though kissed by fire itself, every curve sharpened in the dying sunlight. The path of stone was steep, winding in a serpent's coil up the mountain's back, and as they neared the peak, even Azula grew silent, her calculating eyes tracing the ancient carvings in the stone walls. At last, they reached the gates of the temple of Avatar Roku. Its doors loomed tall, lacquered in red and black, the dragon insignia of the Fire Nation curling across their surface. Fire sages lined the entrance in disciplined rows, bowing as the Crown Prince approached. Commander Yosur stepped forward, his voice echoing inside the vaulted antechamber. Crown Prince Zuko, welcome to Roku's temple. The reception hall has been prepared in your honor. The sages ushered Azula, Rin, Donji, and the other retinue toward the wide ceremonial chamber where incense already curled in the air. Musicians struck slow, reverent chords on deep drums, and acolytes lit rows of braziers so that golden firelight rippled across the high walls. But Zuko did not follow them in. He placed a hand firmly on the sleeve of the head sage Yoriku, his grip unyielding. The elder blinked in surprise at the touch, but Zuko's gaze was steady, sharp with command. "Not the hall," Zuko said. "I need to speak with you. In private." Yoriku frowned, lowering his voice as they stepped aside. "What matter could not wait until after the reception, Crown Prince." Zuko leaned in, his tone dropping to something cold and absolute. "The winter solstice is tonight. I need access to Roku's private shrine immediately. And I must remain there alone until after sunset has passed." The elder's eyes widened, his wrinkles deepening as though he'd been struck. "The solstice," he murmured, his voice a wary hiss. "Ah, I see. You wish to cross into the spirit world?" Zuko did not flinch. "Yes. The border between worlds is thinnest tonight. I will use it." Yoriku's voice sharpened, his natural suspicion slipping past his reverence. "How does the Crown Prince know such things?" "Even among the sages, this knowledge is guarded, preserved only in secret annals. This is not something a soldier or courtier should know." Zuko's golden eyes burned like molten steel. "It is enough that I do know. You will not question how. You need only understand that what I do here tonight is for the good of the Fire Nation." The elder stiffened, his lips parting to protest, but then he saw something in the prince's expression, something hard, something dangerous. There was no weakness in Zuko's gaze, no hesitation. Yoriku realized, with a sudden and almost fearful clarity, that this was a young man who would brook no refusal, not even from the temple. To oppose him now would mean making an enemy of the Crown Prince. And the Fire Sages could not afford such an enemy. At length, Yoriku bowed his head. "Very well, my prince. If this is your will, it shall be done." "Good," Zuko said flatly, though a faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "We'll need 5 firebenders to open the inner shrine. Go! Gather 5 more of your number. Discreetly. And tell them nothing beyond what is necessary. I don't want whispers reaching my sister, or anyone else, about my absence." Yoriku's composure wavered again. He stared at Zuko, eyes narrowing with deep suspicion. 5 benders to open the grid doors to the shrine. Once again, my prince, that requirement has never been spoken beyond these walls. Not even in passing. I must insist, your majesty. Tell me, my prince, how is it you know this?" Zuko tilted his head, the faintest grin cutting through the bloodied scabs still on his face. "Let's just say, fire has always whispered its secrets to me. Perhaps it finds me more willing to listen than others." For a heartbeat, Yoriku simply stood there, unsettled. But he bowed again, lower this time. "As you command, Crown Prince Zuko." Zuko released his sleeve at last, watching as the old sage turned and shuffled quickly away, robes sweeping across the temple floor, his face unreadable. The Crown Prince lingered in the shadows of the temple's hall, his thoughts already sharpening to the night ahead. The winter solstice. The spirit world. Roku. And perhaps, answers to the abyss that still haunted his dreams. Chapter 56, Crescent Island, Avatar Roku. The air outside the temple was thick with the scent of sulfur and salt. Smoke curled from the volcano's distant peak, a dark banner stretching into the reddening sky as the sun inched closer to the horizon. From the stone courtyard, the carved spires of the fire temple rose above them, glowing faintly in the dying light. Its walls were draped in crimson banners embroidered with golden flames, and its gates were watched by soldiers and sages alike. At the heart of this sanctum, before the great double doors of the inner shrine, Prince Zuko stood. His golden eyes gleamed in the dimming firelight, his body still wrapped in fresh bandages from his injuries, yet his posture was tall, commanding. Around him were the sages he had demanded, Elder Shu amongst them as Yorika left to keep up the facade with Azula. Robed in crimson and gold, with his lined face betraying a flicker of unease, 3 younger sages, each solemn and silent. The air was tense. The doors before them towered high, carved of ancient basalt, etched with spiraling flame motifs and inscriptions in the old tongue. They were said to have stood untouched for centuries, their seals refusing to yield to any but the Avatar, or to the combined fire of 5 masters. No soldier, no foreign hand, no pretender could ever breach them. Yet here stood the crown prince of the Fire Nation, calm as though the doors were his to command. Elder Shu broke the silence, his voice a low rumble. "Your Highness, the sanctuary is forbidden to all but the Avatar. Even in times past, princes of the blood were permitted only as honored guests, never as supplicants." "Are you certain?" Zuko cut him off with a sharp glance. "I did not come to ask. I came to enter." His voice was quiet, but its edge left no room for hesitation. 5 firebenders. That is the key, is it not? You will open it for me. The elder stiffened, his lined face betraying surprise. Few outside the order knew of the requirement. His fingers twitched nervously against his sleeves. "How you came to know such a secret?" "I dare not ask." "Then don't," Zuko said coldly. "All you need to know is this: today is the winter solstice. Tonight, the barrier between the worlds thins. I will enter the sanctuary alone, and I will remain there until past sunset. You will tell no one of this. Not my sister, not the soldiers, not even the other sages who stand outside these walls. Do you understand?" Elder Shu's throat tightened as he looked into the young prince's eyes. There was something there he could not easily place, not just ambition, not just hunger, but certainty, as though Zuko already knew the outcome of what he demanded. And in that moment, the elder realized, this boy would one day be Fire Lord. To oppose him now would be folly. His shoulders sagged. He gave the slightest of bows. "As you command, Crown Prince." The other 3 sages exchanged glances but obeyed, stepping into their positions before the massive doors. Together, all 5 drew in a deep breath, their arms sweeping into the fire-bending forms drilled into their very bones. Then, as one, they exhaled. Streams of fire burst from their palms and mouths, 5 torrents of golden flame striking the seals carved into the door. The air trembled with heat. The stone groaned, ancient wards sparking with red light before cracking apart. The great doors rumbled and shifted, ancient hinges screaming as they pulled inward, releasing a gust of air so hot and dry it seared the throat. The sanctuary lay revealed. Zuko stepped forward at once, the soles of his boots ringing softly on polished obsidian tile. His eyes widened despite himself. The chamber was vast, circular, and hollow, its roof rising to a perfect dome. At its very heart loomed a statue that dwarfed every man alive, Avatar Roku, carved in exquisite likeness from white shiny gold like metal. His robes flowed in sculpted folds, his long hair tied back, and his face was serene yet stern, wisdom and wrath carved in equal measure. Above him, set into the ceiling, was the great ruby lens. Even now, it caught the fading rays of the sun, scattering them into fiery motes that danced across the stone walls. When the sun reached its lowest point, those rays would align with Roku's likeness, awakening the spiritual gateway for those bold or worthy enough to attempt the crossing. Beneath Roku's statue, an eternal flame burned in a great brazier, its fire casting long shadows that reached up the walls like grasping hands. The air smelled of incense, sandalwood and ash, mingling with the faint tang of sulfur seeping from the volcano. The walls themselves were painted with murals, avatars of ages past, depicted in Fire Nation avatars, their forms wreathed in flame, their eyes lit white. Zuko felt his breath catch. For a moment, the pride and certainty he carried faltered, replaced by something deeper, quieter, awe. This was not just history. This was his bloodline, his grandfather's spirit made. Behind him, the sages knelt, bowing their heads to the flame. Elder Shu rose to speak, his voice reverent. "This is the heart of Crescent Island, Crown Prince. the most sacred place in the Fire Nation. Once, long ago, Avatar Roku himself sat in this very chamber. Few are given the honor to even gaze upon it. Fewer still may enter during the solstice. Zuko turned, his gaze hard. And tonight, only one will remain. The elder's lips parted, questions trembling on the edge of them. But when he looked into the boy's eyes again, he silenced himself. "As you wish," he murmured. He gestured to the others. "Come. Leave him to his vigil. We will keep the outer halls guarded." Zuko smirked faintly, watching them withdraw. When the doors closed again, sealing him inside with a deep, echoing thud, the chamber fell utterly silent. He approached the brazier, the flickering flames reflected in his golden eyes. His breath came slow and measured, his hand brushing against the warm stone of the altar. "Grandfather," he whispered. The flames bent, flickered, as though stirred by a wind that was not there. The solstice was beginning. The silence inside the hidden shrine stretched as Zuko sat cross-legged before the towering statue of Avatar Roku. His breaths were slow, steady, controlled despite the burning ache still lingering in his broken body. Hours passed, the narrow beam of sunlight crawling across the chamber floor until it crept up Roku's carved features. Dust shimmered like drifting sparks in the beam, giving the stone form of his grandfather an ethereal glow. When the beam finally aligned with Roku's brow, the chamber seemed to hold its breath. The world around Zuko bent, as if reality itself folded in on him. Heat gave way to cool mist. The smell of stone and incense dissolved into the clean, almost unreal scent of clouds. Zuko opened his eyes and the world had changed. He stood barefoot on endless whiteness, clouds swirling beneath his feet as though he were walking on the sky itself. The air was weightless, without horizon, without end. And there, standing amid the mists, was a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair drawn up into a high topknot, his beard flowing down his chest like a river of white. His crimson robes were regal yet simple, marked with the fire sigil of the Avatar. His presence radiated not only command but something greater, wisdom tempered by centuries, the aura of one who had carried the weight of the world. Zuko's chest tightened. He knew instantly who stood before him, though the man's piercing gaze narrowed as if confused. Roku looked at him, studying his face with suspicion. His deep voice carried authority even here, in this formless world. "You are not the boy. You are not Zuko." Zuko froze, only now realizing what Roku saw. He looked down at his hands, broad, calloused, adult. No longer the scarred face of the teenage prince. Instead, the body of Victor Crane stared back at him, tall and hardened, every line of his late-20s life reflected in his spirit. Of course. The spirit world did not care for disguises. It showed the truth. Slowly, he raised his head, forcing himself to meet Roku's eyes. "It's me," he said firmly. "But not the boy you expected." The Avatar's eyes narrowed further, his tone edged with recognition. "I see. You are the one Kyoshi warned me of. The stranger. The spirit that does not belong to this cycle." Zuko clenched his fists but forced a small nod. "Kyoshi, she already told you of me?" Roku's expression did not soften, though there was no hostility in his words. "She said the world had shifted, that a soul foreign to the cycle had entered. A man with ambition and dangerous clarity." His brow furrowed, studying Zuko's spirit form. "I did not think she meant you were the face of my own blood." Zuko swallowed but steadied himself. His voice was clear. "Avatar Roku, it's about time we talked. I didn't come here for riddles or warnings. I came here for answers. Aang will be here soon, I know that. But until then, I need your attention. Because I have things to say, and even more to ask." For a long moment, Roku said nothing, the clouds shifting around them like a restless sea. Then, finally, the old Avatar inclined his head. "Very well. Speak, stranger in my grandson's skin. Let us see if your fire is meant to preserve, or to consume." Chapter 57, Crescent Island, the forgotten avatar. Roku crossed his arms within his robes, silent, waiting. Zuko pressed forward. For weeks now, I've been having episodes. Moments where I wake up in a place. A void. Black. No earth. No sky. Nothing but silence. And in there, I met someone. A man. Middle-aged. An airbender with tattoos, but not like Aang. Not like you. His robes were a chaos of colors, patched from every nation. Fire, water, earth, air, even armor. Roku's brow furrowed. He wielded a staff. Not a glider like Aang's, sharper. Ancient. He spoke like he'd been alive since before the sky learned how to thunder. He asked me questions, about the year, about who ruled, about someone named Raya. The name hung heavy in the clouded air. Roku's lips parted slightly. Raya, he repeated, as though tasting the syllables of a fruit he hadn't eaten in centuries. That is a name I have not heard. He knew one, Zuko pressed, voice sharp. He asked me if I knew the first avatar. And when I answered, he tested me. He pushed me out of that abyss, like I wasn't ready to hear more. But he knew. He knew Rava. He knew everything. Roku's stern mask flickered. That cannot be. It is, Zuko cut in. I've seen him more than once. He knew I wasn't from here. He called me a foreign soul. He said someone pulled me into this universe. Silence. Clouds shifted. Roku's expression was grave, unreadable. Before Zuko could continue, a sudden rush of wind swirled the mists, tugging at his robes. A second figure burst through, stumbling slightly before finding his footing. Aang, Roku said. The boy looked around wildly, staff in hand, until his eyes fell upon Roku and Zuko, or rather Victor's form. His recognition was immediate. Zuko? Aang blinked, stunned. That's you, right? Zuko grimaced. Don't start. We don't have time. Aang turned to Roku, desperation in his voice. I've seen him too. The man in the black void. He called me a vessel. Said I'd ruin his return. He shoved me out before I could ask more. Roku's eyes widened slightly, not in recognition, but in unease. You both. Zuko leaned forward, voice like steel. You don't know him, do you? No, Roku admitted quietly. The spirit world is vast. Older than any avatar. Older than even Rava's bond. I have known of spirits forgotten by time, but this. Zuko's lips curled in a thin smile. Exactly. Not even you know. But I do. Aang flinched at the name. He never told me his name. Because I'm not bound by the river of time like you are, Zuko snapped. His fists trembled. I remember things. I've seen things. He knew one. And he asked about Raya. Tell me, Roku. Who is she? A lost avatar? A forgotten one? Roku's gaze turned to the shifting horizon, as if trying to pull memory from mist. Raya. I recall the name only faintly. Not as an avatar. Perhaps a spirit. Perhaps more. There are gaps, even in my knowledge. But the way you speak. She was real, Zuko said, almost growling. And she mattered. He asked about her like she was alive. Aang looked between them, wide-eyed. Roku, if he knew one, then that means. It means nothing good, Roku cut sharply, though the calm in his voice couldn't hide the unease. One existed nearly 10,000 years ago. No being should survive from that age into ours. And yet he has, Zuko countered, his tone relentless. Not only survived, he knows me. He called me foreign. He knows I don't belong. Roku studied him closely. And perhaps that is why you were drawn into this world. Not by accident, but by design. Aang's breath caught. Then who pulled him here? Zuko's jaw tightened. He looked away. That's what I want to know. The three stood in silence for a long while, clouds curling around them. Finally, Roku spoke again, slow and heavy. Be careful, both of you. There are secrets buried deeper than even the Avatar spirit can reach. The mysterious man. Raya, if they are stirring now, then something long forgotten is pressing against the veil of our world. And neither of you are ready for it. Zuko's eyes narrowed. Then make me ready. The clouds rippled. A cold wind swept across the endless sky, tugging at their robes. Zuko stiffened immediately, the hair at the back of his neck rising. Aang gripped his staff tighter, eyes darting to the horizon. Roku's composure faltered for the first time, his gaze narrowing as though he, too, felt the disturbance pressing into this space. Then she appeared. Out of the curling mist stepped a woman, her gait slow but unshaken, her back straight as though she carried the weight of centuries with her posture alone. She was dressed in traditional water tribe furs, dyed deep blue and stitched with white patterns of waves and moons. But her face betrayed her age. Wrinkles carved like frozen rivers across her cheeks, her hair a silver-white braid that fell over her shoulder. She looked no younger than 70, perhaps older, yet her eyes burned sharp and piercing, like shards of ice that had never melted. "Who are you?" Zuko demanded at once, his voice sharp, his stance braced. Her eyes cut to him with disdain. "Shut up, foreigner." The words slammed against him, heavier than expected. Not boy. Not prince. Not Zuko. Foreigner. She knew. Her gaze lingered only briefly on him before sweeping over Aang and Roku. "The man you speak of," she said slowly, her tone harsh and brittle like ice cracking on a lake, "is very dangerous. I advise the two of you to stay away from him." Zuko's lips pulled into a scowl, but she ignored it. "There is a reason you know nothing of him. Because I made sure his legacy was erased. Do not speak to him again. Do not return to that place where he is bound. To even brush against it is to risk the wrath of something you stand no chance against." Roku's brow furrowed deeply. His voice carried its usual calm, but there was steel beneath it. Is this man truly so powerful? The woman's expression hardened, and she shook her head. "Yogen is not the problem." Zuko stepped forward, eyes narrowed upon hearing the name. "Then what is?" Her sharp gaze snapped to him again, cutting through him as though he were glass. "The one who trapped him there. That is the true danger." Zuko's fists clenched. "And why?" His voice cut sharp, relentless. "Why was his legacy erased? By you?" For the first time, her lips pressed thin, annoyed. Not shaken. Not ashamed. Just irritated at his persistence. "I'm not playing word games with you, old woman," Zuko growled. "Answer my damn questions." That was when she turned to him fully. The wrinkles and the years did nothing to soften her glare. Her presence was suffocating, towering, as if the very spirit world bent to acknowledge her authority. "I am Avatar Raya," she declared. The air seemed to still. Even the rolling clouds hesitated. Aang gasped, wide-eyed, stepping back. Roku's eyes narrowed with shock, his composure faltering. "The one who erased Yogen," Raya continued, voice like a storm pulling through frozen seas. "Not the one who trapped him. But I am the reason no history remembers him. His name, his deeds, his legacy, all cast into silence by my will. And it will remain that way." Her eyes locked onto Zuko, onto Victor, standing here in his true form. Her voice grew sharper, colder. "I am warning you, foreigner. Stay away from Yogen. Trust me when I say, he is not someone you should entangle yourself with. You meddle in forces you do not understand, and will not survive." Zuko's teeth ground together, but he held her gaze. His bloodied face twisted into a stubborn sneer. "You think I'll just walk away just because some ancient avatar said so?" he spat. Her lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smirk, not of amusement, but of condescension. You are reckless, arrogant, and foreign. You do not belong to this cycle. You are already an anomaly. Aang stepped forward, confusion and desperation on his face. But if you're really an avatar, then why hide this? Why erase him? Why keep us blind? Raya's head turned, her old eyes softening for the briefest heartbeat. Because knowledge of Yogen invites ruin. His name alone is enough to summon curiosity. And curiosity leads to doors that should remain closed. Her stare returned to Zuko, cold once more. You should know that better than anyone, foreigner. Your kind never know when to stop. Then why appear at all? Zuko snapped. Why come here if not to answer? Because I had to warn you, she said simply. Walk away. End the war. Play your part in this world. That is all. Do not seek Yogen. Do not seek his prison. Do nothing. Her eyes narrowed, not speaking his name again. She drew closer, her presence towering though she was small and bent with age. The clouds seemed to draw away from her, the air chilled with her words. Focus on ending the war. That is your place. Isn't that right, foreigner? The way she said it this time felt like venom. A blade pressed to his throat. Then, without another word, her body shimmered. Her furs rippled as if made of water, her braid unwound into mist, and her entire form dissipated into the smoke and clouds. Gone. As if she had never been there at all. The silence that followed was crushing. Chapter 58, Crescent Island Warnings from the Past. The clouds still held the echo of Raya's voice, an iron taste, a chill that crept even through the spirit world's colorless air. Aang hovered barefoot on the milk-white vapors, winds teasing the hems of his orange robes. Roku stood beside him, lantern flame eyes unreadable. A few paces off, Zuko, Victor wearing his own soul, glared into the void where Raya had vanished, jaw clenched hard enough to crack stone. She's not the one to fear, Zuko snapped at last, the words dragged from somewhere raw. She's just the gatekeeper to a grave I intend to open. Roku's gaze slid to him. Gatekeepers exist for a reason, he said quietly. When they warn, wise men listen. Aang shifted, uneasy. She said we should stay away from Yogen. The name felt wrong in his mouth, like a word the wind shouldn't carry. Victor drew a long breath. Warnings acknowledged, he said. Then his tone hardened, all ember and steel. But the world burns while we debate secrets. The war, Aang. It will not wait. Before summer's end, you must stand before the Fire Lord and end this. That is the time you have. Roku's eyes cut to Aang, flat and certain. He's right. A comet is coming, the same power that started this war will sharpen it again. Fire Lord Ozai will use it to finish what Fire Lord Sozin began. If you're not ready by then, there won't be a world left to balance. Aang swallowed. The air around him thinned and throbbed, as if the sky itself had a heartbeat. You mean master the four elements by the end of summer, he whispered, more to himself than to them. Air, water, earth, fire, in months. You've done the impossible before, Zuko said. You'll do it again. Start now. North, go to the Northern Air Temple. You and Sokka will meet someone important there and then you will head further to the Northern Water Tribe. Master Pakku is the most formidable waterbender alive. He will train you, and he will train Katara. Zuko nodded once. You'll see me there. Publicly I'll be the hunter nipping at your heels. Privately, I'll be where I need to be. Aang's head lifted, gray eyes stormy. Then why help me at all? His voice roughened. You torched a battlefield. You killed General Fong. You're the Fire Nation's crown prince. Why show me where to grow stronger? Because the role I'm wearing is a mask I can't tear off yet, Zuko said, each word measured. I keep the facade so I can keep breathing. There will be a day I stop pretending. Not today. But it's coming. Soon? Aang pressed. Zuko's mouth crooked, tired, humorless. Sooner than Ozai will like. His gaze flicked to the place where Raya had stood. Anger flared behind his eyes, clean as a blade. And I don't take kindly to being told where I can't walk. Defiance is not a compass, Roku said. It's kept me alive, Zuko shot back. He turned from them, shoulders tight. I'll see you on the ice, Avatar. Bring your courage. You'll need it more than your staff. For now, I've learned all I needed to learn for now. With that, his outline bled into smoke, the spirit world lost its grip on him and he was gone. The air stilled. Aang watched the emptiness where Zuko had been, the wind tugging his sleeves. He feels wrong sometimes, Aang murmured. Not evil, just out of place. Like a tune played on the wrong instrument. Roku's jaw worked, thoughtful. Do not trust him, Aang. Trust can come later, if ever. He knows too much of what should be hidden, and he comes from a world that is not ours. Whoever brought him here, and why, will tilt the balance if we let them. Your duty is the balance. Guard it. Aang's shoulders sank. But he already knows everything. If I do exactly what you say, he's still 3 steps ahead. He stared into the clouds, voice small. I think he's working on something else. Then let him, Roku said. You'll work on you. The wind that worries about every mountain never learns to fly. Master water. Then earth. Then fire. Keep your compassion, but not your naivete. And when he speaks, listen, but do not believe. Not without weighing. The light around them shifted, subtle at first, then decisively, as if the sky itself remembered clocks and seasons. The solstice's golden scene began to pull away from the horizon. Aang felt the tug on his spirit, sudden as surf. I guess, that's my time, he said, voice tight. I'll head north. Roku bowed, the gesture as old as temples. Go well, Avatar. Wind roared, Aang's edges unraveled into motes, then swept away, and the cloud field was quiet again. Roku stood alone on the pale expanse and exhaled a long, weary breath. You heard him, he said to the silence. Now, will you tell me why one of our own merits erasure? A ripple passed across the cloud plain, like a stone dropped through mist. Raya stepped out of that ripple, draped in heavy blues, white fur had thrown back. Her hair was silver and braided, her face a map of winters endured. If you look back, really back, deep inside of us, she said without preamble, you'll notice a gap where a life should be. There is no Yogan. One was the first. Yogan was the second. I was the third. Roku's brow nodded. You cut him from our line. I cut his name, Raya said. Not his choices. You can still feel the scar if you trace it. How? Roku asked. Why? Boot heels clicked, measured, implacable. Another figure joined them, tall as a spear, layered in lacquered greens that whispered of cliffs and courts. Kyoshi's eyes held entire earthquakes. I have wondered this too, she said, voice like a temple bell. A silence that shouldn't be silent. The clouds beyond them darkened, then populated, silhouettes kindled one by one until the sky was thick with watching presences. Hundreds. A chain of lives arcing back into myth. Some distinct, some black against white, all attentive. 2 shapes drew nearer than the rest. The first wore lacquered red and gold that never quite settled into one era, the second strode barefoot in woven robes, hair looped into twin topknots, eyes bright with the kind of curiosity that changes history. One stopped at Raya's side and bowed to Roku and Kyoshi both, genial gravity in the gesture. You have carried us well, he said to Roku. Then, to Raya, are you certain about this, Raya? As you know, Yogan was unique, the best of us. There were reasons you erased his legacy. Raya's mouth thinned. There were needs, she corrected. But our silence has become a weapon, for someone else. He has begun to move pieces in the dark. Better our family hear our shame from us than from him. Kyoshi folded her arms. If a ghost is rattling chains in our halls, I would like to see its face. Shouldn't one also have heard this? Roku's gaze swept the gathered lives above, the archer from the dunes, the scholar queen, the fisherman poet, then settled back on Raya. The boy is not ready. In time I will reveal more to him once more becomes known. Now tell it, he said. All of it. What you erased, and why. Raya lifted her chin. The clouds at their feet quivered, and from their depths rose the suggestion of a long-forgotten city's outline, arches and causeways etched in fog, a mural half revealed, half refused. Yogan, she said, and the name itself bent the air. Second to hold the burden after one. Arguably the greatest of us if you knew what he went through and what he started. The day he chose to. The cloud horizon shuddered, as if something vast had rolled in its sleep. For a heartbeat, a hairline crack ran through the white expanse underfoot and a taste like cold iron prickled Roku's tongue. Kurik shifted his weight, blades of attention bared. There is a presence here besides us, a spirit. Kurik said. They're listening. Of course he is, Raya said, unblinking. He always did have ears where he shouldn't. She looked to Roku, to one, to Kurik in turn. All the more reason to speak. She raised a hand. The mist obeyed. Scenes began to coalesce, torchlight on black stone, a circle of masks, a sky with no stars. And this, Raya said, voice gone low and inexorable, is how the second avatar learned to bend not an element, but everything. The sky full of avatars leaned in as one. The telling began. Zuko's eyes opened with a slow heaviness, lids dragging as if they carried the weight of centuries. The chamber was dim, lit only by the faint sliver of firelight from the torches mounted high along the walls. The smell of stone, aged, cold, consecrated, hung thick in the air. For a heartbeat he was disoriented, unsure if he still lingered in the spirit world or if the pull of the solstice had truly spat him back into the flesh. His gaze lifted, and there loomed the towering form of Avatar Roku's statue. Carved with immaculate precision, eyes stern, beard flowing like waves of stone, it cast a shadow across him. The last red embers of the sunlight filtered through the great opening above, catching on the polished surface of the carved flame in Roku's hand. Zuko's mind churned. Whoever this Yogan was, he wasn't just some oddity. He was interesting. Dangerous. A shadow scrubbed out of history, but too loud to remain buried. Raya's face, old, creased, yet unwavering, burned itself into his thoughts. Her words had been barbed, sharp enough to leave wounds even here, long after she had vanished. She claimed to have erased him. Erased someone as powerful as that Airbender Yogan. Zuko clenched his fists weakly on his knees. Can that even be done? He sifted through what he knew. Officially, canon gave him only fragments, one, the first. He had seen the story himself in that special of the legend of Korra. Then, much later, Roku, Kyoshi, Kurik, Yangchen, Sito. All real, all carved into the bones of the world. He had learned of Avatar Turo, too, an old Fire Nation avatar, the one before Sito, knowledge that had been a gift and a curse since waking in this body. If Raya was an avatar, there was no reason to call her a liar. She carried herself with the weight of truth, the kind that doesn't need to be defended. Which meant Yogan was real. Which meant that the past had holes big enough to bury titans. Zuko's lip curled, blood still dry at the corner of his mouth from earlier wounds. Ancient nonsense, he muttered under his breath, voice echoing softly in the chamber. At least a few thousand years back. Maybe closer to one than to Aang. The thought made his pulse quicken. If this world was already shaking under the pressure of his interference, the truth about Yogan could be a wedge to crack everything open. And that brought him to the next problem. The next necessity. He needed a lion turtle. Not tomorrow. Not a decade from now. Now. Every story whispered of them as myths, scattered relics. But if Raya could, if the abyss that held Yogan could brush against the spirit world itself, then there were powers in this world still waiting to be claimed. The kind of power that would make a crown, a comet, even the Avatar himself, irrelevant. Lion Turtle, His breath misted as he whispered the name, eyes never leaving Roku's stone face. Before things change too quickly. Before they slip out of my control. The silence of the chamber pressed on him. He shifted his weight and stood, muscles groaning but his resolve like iron. The faint lines of his bandages showed beneath his robes, reminders of the blood he had spilled and the blood spilled onto him. But all that mattered now was keeping this knowledge locked behind his teeth. For now. He turned his back on the statue of his grandfather and exhaled slowly, forcing his expression to calm. He could not afford for anyone to see the storm in his chest. Not Azula. Not Rin. Not the sages. Especially not the sages. Tonight, he had glimpsed something raw and unspoken, and it was his alone. Until the time was right, the world would never know. With that, Prince Zuko, Victor Crane Reborn, slipped from the shrine, steps echoing against the cold stone, carrying secrets that burned brighter than the torches lining the hall. Tomorrow, he would wear the mask again. But tonight, he had seen the edges of the abyss. And it stared back. Chapter 59, Crescent Island, the Mask of the Crown Prince. The doors to the great hall of Roku's temple swung open with a heavy groan, the sound echoing along the vaulted ceilings. Lanterns had been lit in abundance, their flames throwing a warm amber glow across carved pillars and the polished stone floors. The hall was alive with voices, Fire Nation soldiers in polished armor mingling with the island's attendants, sages in crimson and gold robes hovering in groups like cautious hawks. At the head of it all, seated on a slightly raised dais, stood Azula, sharp-eyed and composed, with the bearing of someone already accustomed to command. All eyes turned at once when Zuko stepped inside. His movements were steady, but the faint stiffness in his shoulders betrayed exhaustion, the price of blood still weighing on his body. He kept his expression unreadable, save for the faintest trace of a smirk tugging at the corner of his lip. The head sage, Elder Yoriku, was the first to rise. His robes rustled as he bowed low, palms pressed together. "Your Highness," he said, his voice carrying just enough reverence to hide the unease beneath it. "The prince has returned from his meditation. For the past few hours, he requested privacy, time to seek clarity." A murmur swept through the gathered sages. A few nodded solemnly, accepting the explanation without pressing further. But not all. Azula's eyes narrowed, her chin lifting as she studied him. "Meditation," she echoed, the word rolling from her tongue like it was dipped in poison. "For hours." She tilted her head slightly, lips curving into a thin smile. "And tell me, dear brother, what exactly did you find in this little retreat of yours?" Zuko's boots clicked against the polished stone as he strode forward, deliberately ignoring the weight of every watching gaze. He came to a halt just short of the dais, the firelight catching on his bandages beneath his robes. For a heartbeat, the silence hung thick, Azula's stare daring him to trip. He didn't. "I found," Zuko said evenly, voice calm but firm, "exactly what I needed to find." His golden eyes met hers, unblinking. "That's all you need to know, Azula." A flicker of amusement crossed her face, but her smirk didn't soften. "Is that so?" "It is." He shifted his gaze away from her to the sages, then to the soldiers, making sure they all heard his next words. "And now that I have, there is no more time to waste. First thing in the morning, we sail back to the Earth Kingdom continent." Heading north. A ripple of unease moved through the hall. The younger sages whispered to one another, heads bending together. The soldiers exchanged uncertain looks. Even the base commander cleared his throat nervously before speaking up. "Your Highness, forgive me for speaking, but you have only just arrived. The island was prepared for your extended stay, and—" Zuko cut him off with a sharp glance. "Plans change. What must be done is clear. We leave with the sunrise." Shu hesitated, clearly wanting to pry further, but his years of political instinct held his tongue. His face was calm, but his eyes betrayed the questions burning there. What had the prince seen? What knowledge had unsettled him so deeply? Azula, however, was not so easily dissuaded. She leaned forward slightly on her throne-like seat, elbows resting on her knees, gaze boring into her brother. So that's it? You vanished for hours, returned with riddles, and now you're dragging us back to the mainland without explanation? Her voice was velvet, smooth and dangerous. You've grown so secretive lately, brother. One might even mistake it for paranoia. Zuko met her look with a steady calm, a small, weary smile ghosting over his lips. Then mistake it however you wish. I'll not waste words convincing you. Trust my process, or don't. Either way, we're leaving. Her eyes narrowed further, suspicion flashing like steel behind the fire of her irises. She sat back slowly, folding her hands in her lap, her silence sharper than any retort. The room seemed to hold its breath. Soldiers shifted uneasily, waiting for either sibling to push harder. But Zuko offered nothing more, turning instead to the head sage. Ensure provisions are ready at dawn, he ordered, his voice clipped but commanding. The Fire Nation cannot afford delay. And as for my time here, let it be recorded that I came to pay respect to Avatar Roku. Nothing else. The sages bowed, their robes brushing the stone in unison, though their eyes flickered with unspoken questions. Zuko held their gaze just long enough to make it clear this was not a subject to test him on. Then, without another word, he turned and strode past them, the flickering torches casting his shadow tall across the floor as he left the hall. Behind him, Azula's smirk returned, faint but razor-sharp, as though she'd just found a crack in a mask. The corridors of Roku's temple were silent save for the echo of Zuko's boots striking stone. The torches lining the walls cast tall, wavering shadows, chasing him as he walked with a deliberate, measured pace. His body was exhausted, his mind storming with thoughts of Yogan, Raya, and the comet, but he carried himself with the iron spine of a commander who could not afford to falter. When he reached his quarters, he pressed the doors open and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of incense and sea salt, the temple servants had already prepared the space for him. Behind him came the quick steps of Sergeant Rin and Ensign Lee, both men half covered in soot from the day's travel but ever watchful. Rin's voice was low, steady. Prince Zuko, we need to discuss tomorrow's departure. The sentence died in his throat as a voice slid between them like a knife. Not tonight. Azula. She stood a few paces back in the hallway, her golden eyes glittering beneath the torchlight. Her arms were folded casually, but there was nothing casual in her tone. I want a private word with my dear brother. Zuko stiffened, his hand still on the doorframe. Rin and Lee froze, their gazes darting between the siblings. Azula stepped forward smoothly, her voice lowering. You too, tomorrow will be soon enough. Whatever you think you need to say tonight can wait. Rin's jaw tightened as though he wanted to argue, but Lee gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, touching his fellow officer's arm. Yes, Princess. They both bowed and stepped back. Azula waited, watching until they disappeared around the bend of the corridor. Only then did she turn her sharp gaze back to Zuko, a thin smile curling on her lips. There. Now we won't be interrupted. She pushed past him without waiting for permission, the doors closing with a heavy thud behind her. The room suddenly felt smaller. Zuko leaned against the table at the center of the chamber, arms folding across his chest, eyes narrowing. This is a bad idea, Azula. Coming here. At night. Do you want the whole island whispering about our business? Her laugh was soft and dangerous. Are you talking about your toys? She asked, mocking emphasis on the last word. Those loyal little soldiers of yours, Rin, Lee. Surely you can shut them up if they get curious. Of course I can, Zuko shot back, his tone flat. But unlike most, they're actually useful. I'm not in the habit of disposing of valuable tools just to make you feel clever. Azula's smirk twitched but didn't fade. She prowled the chamber slowly, tracing a finger along the carved wood of his desk, her voice silk-wrapped in steel. Then perhaps we should speak of something else. You've grown very secretive, brother. Your moves, your whispers to sages, your vanishing acts. She turned her head sharply, eyes piercing him. What exactly are you doing? The tension snapped taut between them. Nothing you need to know, Zuko said, his voice cold as iron. Her golden eyes burned, a predator's stare. One day, you'll squeal all your little secrets to me. And you know it. She stepped closer, her shadow falling across him. The question is whether I'll have to break you first, or whether you'll come willingly. Zuko's lips curled in a wry half-smile. Did you come here to warn me of that, or to fulfill your part of our deal? The words hung heavy. The air thickened. Azula tilted her head, her smile sharpening. You're not getting that tonight, brother. Not until you stop playing this game with me. Not until you start being more forthcoming about where the Avatar is, and how you plan to catch him. Is that right? Zuko muttered, eyes narrowing. He straightened, stepping closer until the space between them crackled with more than fire. Well, I guess you're right about one thing. The Avatar is heading north. To the Northern Water Tribe. But there's something you're forgetting. He leaned in slightly, his face twisted into a smile that was equal parts exhaustion and menace. He's flying on a giant bison. We're sailing on slow ships. If you think chasing him across the ocean is a plan, you're a fool. I have to think ahead. Azula arched a brow. Ahead? Yes. Zuko turned from her, his eyes fixing on the map rolled across his desk. His hand slid over the parchment until it rested on a marking near the mountains. After this, we head to where I know he will be. The Northern Air Temple. Silence pressed in for a long moment. Azula's smirk returned, though fainter than before. She studied him, her gaze sharp and thoughtful, as though weighing whether he was bluffing or truly 3 steps ahead. Always obsessed with the Avatar, aren't you? She murmured, before leaning back and folding her arms. Very well, brother. I'll humor you. For now. But her eyes told a different story, suspicion, curiosity, and the faint spark of something almost like respect. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in part 8. Peace.